Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. We were hiking out near the Trinity site, not the actual blast zone that's fenced and locked. But there's BLM land all around it, mostly flat desert with these dry riverbeds and old crumbling fence posts half buried in sand. You can still find old radiation warning signs rusting in the brush if you look. We weren't trying to do anything spooky or off limits. My girlfriend Eliza had this goal to hike every marked trail in southern New Mexico before the year was out, and this one, a stretch near Mockingbird Gap, was on her list. It's not popular. No shade, no water. The guide site called it featureless, but historically notable. We parked just off the highway around 7:30 a.m., sun already hot even in October. We packed light, water, dried fruit, first aid, my Garmin watch, and Eliza's GPS app running on her phone. She liked to record our hikes. Usually the GPS logs matched up exactly, even if the cell signal was spotty. We started off heading east on a dirt track that cut through an old cattle gate. The trail follows what used to be a supply road during the Manhattan Project, though you wouldn't know it. Just gravel and scrub and endless yucca plants. We passed a dead coyote about an hour in, nothing fresh, just picked clean and sun-dried. I only mention it because Eliza made a joke about it being a bad omen. Should have brought sage, she said. It was flat the whole way. Easy walking. The heat shimmered over the sand like water, and the farther we went, the less there was to see. I remember Eliza checking her phone and saying we'd done 3.8 miles and were making good time. We took a break under what little shade the side of a small, rocky outcrop gave us. It wasn't much. After that, the trail sloped down into an arroyo, dry, cracked earth with a few odd animal tracks, and curved toward a low ridge. That's where things get hard to explain. We were walking side by side, not talking much, just the crunch of our boots and the wind. Then we both stopped at the same time. No sound, no wind, just dead still. That's what hit me first, the silence. You expect quiet in the desert, but this was different, oppressive. Not a single insect, not a single bird. The air felt heavy, like walking into a sealed room. Eliza turned to me and said, "Do you hear that?" I said, "I don't hear anything." She looked off to the right, toward a dry ridge about 30 yards off trail. I thought I heard something metallic, like a chain dragging. I didn't, but I nodded. We both stood there for maybe 30 seconds, just listening. Then I can't say what changed. There was no flash, no sound, no sudden feeling. But the light shifted, like the sun had moved behind clouds, only there weren't any. Everything felt flat, like contrast had been turned down. We kept walking. I don't remember deciding to. We just started moving again, like nothing happened. The next thing I remember clearly is the wind coming back. Just a little breeze, but enough to make the brush sway. And then the heat hit me all at once, like I'd just stepped back into it. I looked around, confused, because the arroyo looked deeper. The ridge we were approaching was closer than it should have been. Eliza was ahead of me now, maybe 20 feet, squinting at her phone. She stopped and called back. "Did we miss a turn?" I caught up. She showed me the GPS track. The blue line just skipped. One moment we were half a mile back. The next, it resumed a mile farther along. No zigzag, no drift. Just a hard jump, like someone cut a chunk out of the recording. I checked my Garmin. Same thing. There was a gap, exactly 58 minutes missing. No heart rate, no elevation gain, no pace data. 1 second I was walking at 3.2 miles per hour. Next, nothing. Then back to normal, like we'd never stopped. We just stood there staring at our screens, trying to make sense of it. The sky was the same, no signs of a storm. We weren't dizzy, no headaches, nothing felt off in our bodies. I said maybe it was a bug, a GPS hiccup, but 2 devices, same stretch, same exact time. Didn't feel right. We turned back. Neither of us said much. The silence had crept back in too. Not total, but wrong somehow. The wind sounded muffled, like it wasn't reaching us. Every step echoed. It's hard to explain. About halfway back, Eliza stopped and pointed to something sticking out of the sand. Looked like a rod at first, metal, maybe 2 feet long, angled upward like an antenna. I thought maybe it was part of some old equipment or survey gear. We walked up to it, but as we got closer, I saw that it wasn't attached to anything. Just a thin, dull gray cylinder jammed into the earth, no markings. She reached for it, and I don't know why, but I said, "Don't." It wasn't like I thought it would shock her or anything. I just didn't want her touching it. My stomach felt tight, and the air was hot again. Way hotter than it should have been. She stopped. We took a few pictures, but nothing clear. Glare made them useless. We marked the spot on her app, but when we checked later, the pin wasn't there. Just didn't save. When we got back to the car, we both felt wiped. More than we should have been for 8 miles on flat land. I checked the timestamp on the dash cam. We should have been back around noon. It was 1 to 17 p.m. Neither of us remembered stopping. No food break, no shade, just a missing hour. That night, we tried uploading the GPS data to her laptop. The files were intact, but when we zoomed in on the gap, it was just empty space. No time codes, just a clean cut. I exported the data and tried to open it in a text editor. The file jumped from 10:43:12 to 11:41. No error, no corruption, like nothing ever happened. We haven't hiked out there since. The weird part is we've never had GPS issues anywhere else, even places more remote. It was just that stretch, just that day. 1 hour we don't remember, 1 mile we didn't walk. I took the photo just after 3 a.m., facing northwest over Groom Lake. The air was dead still, no breeze, no animal sounds, just the soft clicking of my shutter as I cycled through 30-second exposures. I was maybe 2 miles east of the old perimeter, outside the legal boundary, but close enough to see the faint shapes of hangars in the distance, if I squinted hard enough. I'd driven in from Alamo, Nevada, parked my Jeep along a gravel access road, and hiked the last stretch to avoid attention. I'd done this before. I knew what I was doing. I wasn't looking for anything weird. I wasn't even thinking about the base. I was just there for the sky. The Milky Way is insane out there. Clean and wide, no light pollution, nothing but stars. Scouted the spot a few weeks earlier and marked the elevation on my GPS. Brought 2 tripods, a Sony A7R IV, and my old Pentax just for fun. The night had been going smooth. Clear sky, good air clarity. I'd set the camera to ISO 1600 with a 20mm lens and let it run on interval mode. I'd already gotten maybe 24 frames. I remember checking the preview screen and being annoyed at a plane trail in one of them, a dotted line from a commercial jet blinking red and white. I was kneeling by the gear, swapping SD cards, when the sound stopped. Not like a noise stopped. I mean all of it. The quiet rustle of distant insects, the faint hum of electronics, even my own breathing felt muted. It wasn't total silence. It was like someone had stuffed cotton in my ears and turned the world down to 30%. There was this pressure too, like altitude, but I hadn't moved. I looked up. No lights, no shapes, just stars. Everything looked the same. But I felt watched, in that very specific animal way. The hair on my arms stood up, and I had this sudden intense certainty that something enormous was right above me. I don't mean like a plane flying over. I mean right above. No sound, no movement, just the weight of it. I didn't move for a full minute, just crouched there, frozen, staring into the black sky like an idiot. Then, just as sudden as it started, everything came back. The bugs, my ears, the low clicking from the camera. A soft breeze moved across the sagebrush. I thought maybe it was a weird pressure drop or a passing thermal. Tried to brush it off. I packed up soon after. I didn't want to, but my hands were shaking a little, and the spot didn't feel safe anymore. Not in a danger sense, just wrong. Like I was someplace I wasn't supposed to be, even more than usual. I hiked back to the Jeep, watching the sky the whole time. There were no lights, no helicopters, no patrols. Nothing followed me. I got home to Henderson just before sunrise. I didn't even look at the files until 2 days later. I sat down, dumped everything onto my external drive, and started going through them. Most were perfect. Crisp stars, smooth light trails, even the jet frame wasn't bad. But then I hit frame 114. The timestamp was right, 3:07 a.m. Everything else about it was wrong. It was supposed to be another long exposure of the northwest sky. Stars, some terrain, maybe a bit of the lake bed in silhouette. What I got instead was a diagonal smear of light thick and pale and oddly structured, like a wide stripe of melted glass running from the lower right corner to the upper left. It didn't look like a camera issue. The stars around it were sharp, no motion blur. The tripod hadn't shifted. Every object in the frame, except for this one smear, was perfectly still. And it wasn't a lens flare either. It had depth, texture. Like something massive had passed overhead at impossible speed, leaving a drag of itself behind. I zoomed in, thinking maybe it was a glitch, but the pixels were consistent. The smear wasn't digital noise. It had color gradations, shadowing. Parts of it looked almost transparent, like gauze or film catching light in layers. At the center, barely visible, was a faint structure. Not a shape I could describe exactly, but it didn't look random. It had symmetry, sharp angles in some places, smooth in others. But faint, like it was moving too fast to capture properly. No sound, no blur, just that impossible presence sliced across a single frame. I checked the photos before and after it. Frame 113 and 115 were clean, identical composition, nothing unusual, just stars. No trail, no gap in time, same shutter speed, same exposure. It was like whatever that thing was only existed for the duration of that one shot. I tried to recreate it. Took the camera out to the desert again. Same settings, same lens, same time of night. Nothing. I even tried moving the tripod mid-exposure to see if I could fake the effect. Couldn't get close. Any real motion blurred the stars. This thing didn't. I showed it to a guy I know from a gallery in town, Jack. Someone who's been doing astrophotography for years. He stared at it for a long time, then asked what kind of post I'd done. I told him none. Straight from the card. He didn't say much after that. Just told me to back up the raw file and not show it around too much. I've kept the original file on a drive I don't use for anything else. I look at it sometimes, usually late, usually when I can't sleep. The weirdest part isn't even the smear itself. It's how it changed the memory of that night. I can't remember packing up. I can't remember walking back to the Jeep. I remember the pressure, the silence, the feeling of something just there. And then I'm driving, already halfway to Vegas. I didn't lose time. My watch was fine. GPS logged the hike normally, but something feels missing. Like whatever passed overhead didn't just leave a trail in the sky, but in my brain too. Like it slid across the world so fast it bent something around it. Time, memory, space, I don't know. That photo shouldn't exist. Nothing makes sense about it. Not the physics, not the silence, not the fact that only one frame caught it. And yet it's there. All 42 megabytes of it. I haven't gone back to that spot. I haven't shot long exposures since. I set the camera up just before dusk, facing north-northeast, angled slightly up from the ridgeline. The plan was to get a full night's time-lapse of the stars rotating over the desert. I'd been wanting to shoot from that spot for a while, high up on the ridge near Tikaboo Peak, past where the foot trail starts getting narrow and the rocks flatten out. It was quiet, remote, and far enough from anything that light pollution wasn't an issue. I was up there alone. My buddy Eric had backed out the day before, said he was feeling sick. I wasn't thrilled about going solo, but I'd already taken time off work and prepped the gear. I hiked up in the late afternoon with enough water and a headlamp, shot a few stills at golden hour, then got the time-lapse started as the sun dipped below the ridge. The air got cold fast once the sun was gone. That dry, thin desert chill where you feel the heat vanish like it's been sucked out of the rocks. There was no wind, no clouds. The only sound for miles was the occasional crunch of gravel if I shifted my weight. I sat about 10 feet from the tripod, wrapped in a sleeping bag, drinking lukewarm instant coffee from a thermos, and watching the sky turn. It was one of those nights where you feel small in a good way. I remember thinking that. I let the camera run for 6 hours, set to take a frame every 15 seconds. It was a Sony mirrorless, nothing fancy, but good enough to pull in starlight with a wide lens. The battery lasted longer than I expected. Around 2:30 a.m., I packed it up, hiked down in the dark, and drove back to my place in Caliente. I didn't look at the footage right away. I let the SD card sit in the camera bag for almost 2 days while I caught up on sleep and errands. When I finally reviewed the footage, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a beer, scrubbing through the frames on my laptop. Most of it looked normal. The stars streaked in slow arcs across the sky, rotating around Polaris like they're supposed to. The desert floor stayed dark, except for a couple distant flashes, probably headlights from a highway miles off. I watched the footage at double speed, then slowed it down to look at some of the better frames. That's when I noticed the light. At first, I thought it was a planet, bright, steady, low on the horizon, just above a formation I recognized from the hike. But it didn't move. Everything else was arcing smoothly through the sky, but that one light held position frame after frame. It was there from maybe 30 minutes after I started recording until the last 20 minutes before I stopped. Roughly 6 hours. Same exact spot. I went back to the original frames to make sure it wasn't a dead pixel or sensor glitch. It wasn't. It shifted slightly when I panned across, stayed consistent with the other stars in terms of noise and clarity. It wasn't too bright, maybe equivalent to a first magnitude star, but it didn't fade or flicker like the others. I pulled up a star chart and tried to match it. Nothing. It wasn't Vega, Deneb, or anything in that area. It wasn't on any satellite tracker either. I even checked older flight logs just in case it was a high-altitude balloon or something unusual in civilian airspace. Nothing came up. I tried boosting the contrast and applying a star motion overlay. That's when it got weirder. The stars, when mapped, traced beautiful concentric arcs. That light, it was the only fixed point. Not the North Star, not Polaris. Just fixed. I spent an hour zoomed in on that section. There was a small flicker around 1:17 a.m., maybe 2 or 3 frames, where it seemed to get brighter, then dim back to normal. At exactly 2:11:45, it blinked out. Not faded, blinked. One frame it was there, next frame it was gone. No motion trail, no drift, just off. I opened the audio track even though I hadn't expected to pick up anything. There was no wind, no animals, no human sounds. But around the same time that flicker happened, just before 1:18, I caught a low-frequency hum. Barely there. I had to amplify it 5 times just to notice. It lasted 4 seconds, then stopped. I checked the file metadata. Everything was intact. No corruption, no skipped frames. I didn't tell anyone about it for a few days. I thought maybe it was some weird artifact or reflection, but I kept going back to it. Watching that tiny point of light hang there like a nail in the sky while everything else moved around it. I finally showed it to Eric the next week. We were at his place watching a game, and during halftime, I pulled out the laptop and said, "Tell me if anything looks weird." He watched it through once, then again. Didn't say much at first. Then he asked, "That one star there, why isn't it moving?" I told him I didn't know. He sat back and looked at me for a second, then said, "You know what's over that ridge, right?" "Yeah, Groom Lake, that whole area is off limits." I never got close enough to see anything, but you feel the weight of that place when you're out there. Not in a dramatic way. Just quiet. Still, like the air's watching you. Eric didn't ask to see it again. We changed the subject. That night, I copied the footage to a flash drive and put it in a drawer. A few weeks later, I went back out to the same ridge with the same gear. Clear night, similar setup. This time I stayed out the full 8 hours, nothing unusual. The stars moved like they were supposed to. No stationary light, no flicker, just normal sky. But when I played back the audio from that night, I caught something faint at the start of the second hour. Not a hum this time, a kind of clicking. Like 2 pieces of plastic tapping together in a slow rhythmic pattern. 3 clicks, then silence, then 3 more. I checked the footage again, nothing visible, but the clicks repeated, always in 3s, spaced about 90 seconds apart. It went on like that for maybe 15 minutes. Then nothing for the rest of the night. I haven't been back to that ridge since. I was hiking alone in the Shoshone Mountains late September last year. It was that in-between weather. Warm during the day, dropping fast once the sun dipped. Dry air, but the kind of quiet that makes every step sound too loud. The trail I was on wasn't even a real trail, more like an old access road that hadn't been maintained in decades. I'd been following it for a couple miles past where most maps stop marking anything. I wasn't trying to be a daredevil or anything. I just liked being alone in places no one cared about anymore. I had a paper topo map in my pack, the USGS kind with faded ink, and it showed this old Cold War era communications site near the summit. Just a single square marked bald, no name, no description. I figured it'd be interesting to check out. The satellite view online showed a faint clearing and what looked like the outline of a small foundation, so I aimed for that. I got there a little before sunset. The building was long gone, just a concrete pad and a couple rusted brackets sticking up like rebar bones. No fence, no debris. There were broken ceramic insulators scattered around, the kind they used on old antenna towers. I found a few half-buried lengths of coax cable too, the shielding flaking apart like dead bark. The spot was totally still. No birds, no wind. Just me and this slab of concrete with the last bit of sunlight stretching my shadow across it. That's when I noticed the indentations. Two perfect circles in the exposed rock, maybe 20 feet from the old foundation. They weren't carved or drilled, more like pressure marks. About 3 feet across, spaced maybe 10 feet apart. They were smooth, not polished exactly, but smoother than the surrounding stone, like the rock had been pressed down without breaking. No scorch marks, no debris, no tracks. I looked around to see if a vehicle could have gotten up there. There wasn't any way. The slope was too steep, too rocky, and the old road had collapsed a mile back, a washout that nothing short of a dirt bike could have crossed. But these circles were just sitting there, side by side, slightly sunken into the rock, like something heavy had touched down and then left without moving in any direction. I took a photo with my phone. Nothing fancy. Just one shot. I didn't think much of it at the time, just figured it was strange and maybe worth Googling later. The sun was dropping fast, and I didn't want to navigate the descent in the dark, so I turned around and started heading back. About 10 minutes down, I realized it was too quiet. No crickets, no wind. My footsteps were the only sound, and even those felt dampened, like the rocks weren't echoing right. I stopped and listened. Still nothing. Then after a moment, I heard this low-frequency hum. Faint but steady, not like power lines, more like when you're inside a car with the windows up and a diesel truck is idling nearby. You feel it more than you hear it. I thought maybe my phone was picking up feedback or something weird, so I pulled it out. It wouldn't turn on. Battery had been at 64% earlier. Now the screen stayed black. No haptic response, no charging icon when I plugged in the battery pack. I kept walking. The hum faded the further I got from the summit, and eventually the normal sounds came back. Birds, a breeze through the brush, a coyote yipping way off to the east. I told myself it was nothing, probably just interference from something underground. There's old mining tunnels all through the region, and God knows what's buried up there. I camped that night lower down the ridge, maybe 2 miles from the site, just a small clearing in the pines. I made a fire, cooked a freeze-dried meal, and tried to shake the weird feeling. But around 2 a.m., I woke up to this vibration. Not a quake, more like a pulsing, rhythmic thump I could feel through my sleeping pad. It wasn't loud, it wasn't even regular, just there. Like someone walking heavy-footed in slow circles outside the tent. I unzipped the flap and looked out. Clear sky, stars sharp enough to cut, no movement. The thumping stopped the moment I opened the tent. I sat there with my boots halfway on, waiting. Nothing. No wind, no animals. Just a very faint smell, like hot metal. Not ozone, not burning. Just warm iron, like an engine that's been off for 10 minutes. I didn't sleep after that. Packed up at first light and hiked out without eating breakfast. When I got back to my car, an old Forester parked at the Ranger pull-off, the radio was on. It shouldn't have been. I'd turned the engine off and locked it like always. But the ignition was in the accessory position and the FM tuner was scanning nonstop, looping every half second through static. Not stopping on anything, just flicking through the dial. The battery was nearly dead. I turned everything off, sat there with the door open for a few minutes, trying to calm down. I wasn't scared exactly, just disoriented, like something had skipped a few seconds of time without telling me. Back in town, I plugged my phone in. It charged fine, but the camera roll was missing the photo of the circles. All the others were there. Trailheads, rocks, some deer I spotted near a creek. But the shot I took at the summit wasn't in the gallery, no deletion record, no backup. I checked the timestamp on the last photo I did have. It ended 2 minutes before I remember taking the one of the indentations. A week later, I went back. Same route, same summit. Everything looked the same, except the circles were gone. Not filled in, not vandalized, just gone. The rock looked undisturbed, like they'd never been there. But where they had been, I noticed a few odd things. The lichen pattern was off. Everywhere else, the rock had this greenish fuzz clinging to the cracks. But in those two spots, it was totally bare. No growth, no discoloration, like fresh concrete, except it was stone. And when I stood in the center of where one of the circles had been, my GPS wouldn't hold a lock. It'd drift, jump, freeze. I moved 5 feet away and it snapped back. I tested it 5 times. Same result. I haven't been back since. I still hike, but not out that way. Not near that summit. I tried searching government databases for what used to be at the site, military communications records, FAA towers, whatever, but there's nothing. Just a note in a declassified file saying temporary relay installation 1963 to 1968 removed. I don't think I'll find anything else out, and I don't really want to. I was a park ranger for almost 8 years, working mostly in the backcountry of the Sawtooth Wilderness in Idaho. The job was mostly what you'd expect: patrolling trails, checking campsites, reporting downed trees or hazards, dealing with lost hikers, that kind of thing. But there were nights, usually clear and cold, when I'd be alone out there, sitting by a campfire or on a ridge, that I'd hear this low droning hum. It wasn't constant, and it wasn't the kind of noise you'd expect from nature. No wind, no bugs, no distant trucks or planes. Just this deep, vibrating sound, like a subwoofer turned way down and pulsing through the ground. The first time I noticed it, I thought maybe it was my own ears messing with me or some weird tinnitus, but it wasn't inside my head. It felt like it was coming from the earth itself, or maybe the air around me. When that hum started, my vision would kind of blur around the edges, like I was suddenly looking through a fogged lens, or the whole world was vibrating too fast for my eyes to focus properly. It was subtle, but noticeable. I'd never heard anything like it during the day. It always happened at night, usually past midnight but before dawn, and only on certain nights. I kept a mental log, and it happened mostly when the air was really still and the sky was clear. One night, I was patrolling a remote part of the wilderness near Redfish Lake. The sky was perfectly clear, stars everywhere, the Milky Way stretched across the horizon. I was sitting on a rock above the trail, eating some trail mix, and watching the lake's surface shimmer under the moonlight. Then the hum started. It was so low I barely felt it at first, just a gentle vibration through the soles of my boots. I put my hand on the rock next to me and could feel it humming there too, like the stone itself was alive and resonating with some invisible frequency. The sound grew slowly, steady, and rhythmic. Not loud, but overwhelming in a way that's hard to explain. The weirdest part was how my vision began to go fuzzy. It wasn't just my eyes. My whole head felt like it was slightly out of sync with reality, like I'd slipped into some halfway state between being awake and dreaming. Then everything stopped. Right after the hum faded out, there was this long silence. Not just the usual quiet of the forest at night, but a silence that felt like the world was holding its breath. No wind, no animal calls, no rustling leaves, nothing. It lasted for a full minute or maybe more, and it was so complete that I felt like I couldn't even hear my own heartbeat. I looked around, half expecting something to happen, but nothing did. The silence stretched and stretched, and I got this odd, sinking feeling, like I was being watched from the shadows beyond the tree line. I packed up my gear and headed back to camp, but the feeling stuck with me. I kept wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was some kind of seismic activity or distant machinery. But this was the wilderness, hundreds of miles from anything like a factory or power plant. After that night, the hum came back a few more times over the months. Each time, it followed the same pattern. Deep, vibrating drone, vision blurring, then silence that felt too heavy to be normal. I started trying to record it with a handheld mic and an old tape recorder I kept in my pack, but every time the hum started, the recorder would malfunction. Batteries would die instantly, or the device would shut off without warning. I even tried using my phone, but the microphone would pick up static or nothing at all. One evening in late September, I was alone near a clearing called Elk Meadow. I had just finished checking a campsite and was about to head back when I heard the hum again. This time, it was louder and more persistent, filling the whole clearing. I sat down on a fallen log, trying to stay calm. The hum seemed to thicken the air around me like a fog made of sound. My vision blurred exactly like before, but this time I also felt the pressure in my chest, like the air had gotten heavier. Then the silence hit, longer and more oppressive than ever. My ears popped and I felt a faint ringing. But what really freaked me out was that the birds, which usually get quiet at night but don't disappear completely, had all gone silent. Not a single cricket, owl, or distant howl. Just dead quiet. I thought maybe it was a trick of the mind or stress from being alone so much, but then I caught movement in the trees just beyond the clearing. Something low and dark was shifting slowly, but when I blinked or looked directly, it vanished. No animal I'd ever seen behaved like that. It didn't move like a deer or a bear, more like a shadow sliding across the bark and leaves. I stood up, ready to leave, but then I heard a faint crackling noise, like electricity sparking softly. I looked around, but there were no power lines or anything man-made nearby. The crackling stopped as soon as I focused on it, and I was left with the fading echo of that hum vibrating through the ground. I hurried back to my truck, not daring to look back. The radio on the dashboard was dead static, even though I was usually able to get a signal there. When I got home, I told a couple of ranger friends about it, but they laughed it off or said I was probably hearing distant mining operations or natural gas vents. I checked the park records. No mining, no industrial activity that far in. Just wilderness. After I left the ranger job, I moved away from Idaho, but I kept having weird dreams about that hum. In the dreams, it feels like the world is pulsing with this invisible vibration, and if I try to listen too closely, everything around me goes silent and stretches out, like time slows down. I wake up feeling off balance, like something inside me is still vibrating at that low frequency. Sometimes when I'm out hiking or camping, especially when it's quiet and the air is still, I'll catch myself listening for that hum again. Like I'm waiting for the moment my vision will blur and the silence will stretch too long. And every now and then, I swear I hear it, just beneath the noise of the wind or the distant river. This deep, unplaceable drone that makes the edges of the world feel a little less solid. But no matter how many times I hear it or how long it lasts, I've never seen anything directly. No lights, no shapes, no clear signs. Just the hum, the blurry vision, and that heavy silence that follows. I was driving home from a weekend trip in the Rockies, heading back to Denver through Berthoud Pass. It was late afternoon in early October, the kind of day where the sun's just starting to dip and the shadows get long and weird, but the air still smells like pine and cold earth. The leaves were turning, mostly yellow and orange, and the highway was mostly empty except for the occasional truck or camper. I'd left my friend's cabin up near Estes Park earlier that morning, and the drive usually takes about 2 hours. I'd done it dozens of times before, so I wasn't worried. About halfway through the pass, around mile marker 88, my phone suddenly dropped from full LTE bars to nothing. No signal. Just that little spinning wheel that means trying to connect. I checked my phone a couple times. No messages, no calls, no Google Maps updates. I figured it was normal for that stretch. The pass is known for patchy service, especially when you're tucked into the deeper valleys. I kept driving, expecting the signal to come back any minute. The road was winding, narrow in spots, with rocky cliffs on one side and steep drop-offs on the other. I was paying close attention to the road since it was getting darker, and there was a thin mist rolling in, making the edges of the trees look blurry. After about 15 minutes, still no service. I checked my phone again. The battery was at 60%, so I wasn't worried about it dying. But that spinning wheel stayed no matter what I tried. No texts, no calls, no notifications. I started to feel a little uneasy, not because of the signal loss itself, but because of how quiet everything felt. No cars passed me going the other way. No birds, no wind noises, just this heavy silence in the cabin of my car. Then I noticed the speedometer. I'd been driving for 18 minutes exactly since losing signal night, but my phone's location services didn't update at all during that time. I had the GPS on because I was using maps earlier to check traffic. I checked the location history right after the signal went out and again as soon as it came back. Before losing service, it showed me driving through the normal winding roads. After signal returned, it immediately updated with my location on the highway again, about 2 miles past the spot where I'd lost signal. But for the entire 18 minutes of no service, there was no location data saved. The timeline in the app just jumped forward with a gap. That's when I started to get weirded out. At first, I thought maybe the phone was glitching or the GPS chip was faulty, but the phone worked perfectly before and after. GPS was tracking normally, no errors or low accuracy warnings. I wasn't in airplane mode or anything that would disable location. I was just losing cell service, which usually wouldn't affect GPS. The satellites work independently of cell towers. I pulled over at a turnout just after the signal returned and checked my phone more closely. The clock and timer matched up exactly. 18 minutes lost in the middle of the drive with zero location recorded. The Maps app didn't even show a straight line or estimate, just a blank gap. I played back the map history a few times. Before the gap, the road curves through the mountains. After, the same. But in between, nothing. Like I'd vanished from the map. That was impossible, right? I mean, I'd been driving the whole time, no stops, no weird detours. My car's dash cam was off because I forgot to charge it, so I had no visual record, just the phone's weird GPS silence. I got back on the road, driving slower, watching the sky and the cliffs closely. I kept scanning the edges of the trees, looking for anything odd or out of place. The mist was getting thicker and the light was fading fast. About 10 minutes later, I noticed a strange smell. It wasn't smoke or anything sharp, just kind of metallic and faintly chemical, like a faint scent of ozone mixed with wet dirt. I stopped again at another small turnout, rolled down the windows trying to catch the smell again. It was stronger here, almost overwhelming if I took a deep breath. I snapped a few photos of the trees and rocks, thinking maybe it was some natural thing I didn't recognize. No cars had passed me all this time, not a single one. The road was dead quiet, except for my engine and the occasional bird call. The mist seemed thicker here too, hanging in the air like low clouds. I texted my roommate that I was still on the pass but running late. Message didn't send. Finally, about 3 miles after the second stop, the cell signal came back full bars. My phone buzzed with a bunch of texts from earlier and notifications all at once. Maps immediately filled in my route again, resuming normal tracking. I breathed a little easier. The weird gap ended. I finished the drive and got home by sunset. Checked the phone data again in detail. No app crashes, no weird bugs except the missing location data during those 18 minutes. The timestamps matched the time I'd spent on the road. Nothing else unusual in the logs. I tried to explain it away. Maybe it was a GPS blackout zone, like those rare spots with weird magnetic interference. Maybe a software glitch. But I can't find any record of a known blackout zone on Berthoud Pass. People drive it all the time with GPS on. I asked a few friends familiar with the area. One said he'd experienced cell drops there, but never GPS failure or gaps in tracking. A week later, I drove the same route again, at the same time, under similar weather. No signal loss, no gaps, no smells, no silence. The whole thing feels like it happened in a bubble of time and space that was somehow disconnected. I still think about it when I'm driving through mountain roads or hiking alone, like maybe something was watching me, or maybe the pass itself shifted in some way I can't explain. But what really gets me is how precise it was. Exactly 18 minutes. No location data, no signal, no interruption anywhere else. Like a perfect cutout in reality. I haven't gone back since. Not yet. I was out camping with my dog Tucker about 15 miles outside Durango, Colorado. It was late October, cold enough to need layers, but not snowing yet. I parked off one of the Forest Service roads, hiked about a mile up a drainage that flattened into this little basin with tall pines and a good view of the sky. I'd camped there twice before. No one around, no cell signal, just quiet. Tucker's a German Shepherd mix for his breed. Smart, too. He's not the type to bark at nothing or spook easy. That's why what happened stuck with me the way it did. The first weird thing happened around 6:30, right after I got the tent set up. I was gathering some branches for the fire when Tucker just froze mid-step. His ears went straight up, tail stiff. I thought maybe it was a deer or elk, but he didn't sniff or move toward it like he usually would. He just stood there staring into the trees up the ridge. I called his name, clapped a little. Nothing. He wouldn't move. Eventually, I walked over, put my hand on his back. He flinched, like I'd surprised him, then slowly looked up at me and followed me back to the fire pit. He stayed close the rest of the night, even while I cooked. Usually he wanders around while I eat, chasing smells. That night he laid down with his head on my boot. It got fully dark around 7:45. No moon. Stars were clear, no clouds. Cold enough I had to pull my jacket out. I had a little fire going and was sipping from a metal cup of bourbon when Tucker sat up real straight and stared up at the sky. Not scanning, just locked onto one patch almost directly above us. Maybe a little west? At first I figured he'd seen a bat or owl or something, but after 10-15 minutes, he hadn't looked away once. His ears twitched now and then and his lips were pulled back like he was baring his teeth, but he didn't growl yet, just stared. Then, almost on a dime, he stood up and started growling low in his throat. Not barking, just this deep, constant rumble. I looked up where he was watching. It was just stars. That's all I could see. Same pattern, same brightness. No satellites moving through, no planes, no clouds. I even turned off my headlamp to get my eyes fully adjusted, and I still didn't see anything unusual. But Tucker kept growling. Same spot, no change. It went on like that for almost an hour. I checked the time because I kept thinking he'd stop. He didn't sit down, didn't sniff around, just kept his eyes fixed on that patch of sky and growled like he was warning something. I started to feel it too, this pressure in my chest. Not panic, just like my body was telling me to go. Like something was wrong, even though everything looked normal. The fire crackled, wind moved through the trees now and then, stars stayed put. Around 9:10, the fire popped, and I looked down to toss another stick on. That's when I noticed the shadows had shifted in a weird way. The fire wasn't dying, but suddenly the shadows of the trees were stretching sideways, not flickering like they should have been. Like something bright, but not visible, was above us, pushing the shadows around without making a sound. I looked up again, squinting hard. Still couldn't see anything. But the stars in that patch Tucker was watching, they looked too still, like someone had taken a photo and pasted it onto the sky. No twinkling, no slight shifting, just frozen. And in the middle of them, one point of light was ever so slightly off. Not brighter or a different color, just wrong. I can't explain it. It wasn't moving, it wasn't doing anything. But the longer I looked at it, the more it didn't feel like it belonged. Tucker started to bark then. Sharp, loud, fast. He was lunging toward the fire, hackles raised, eyes still pointed up. I grabbed his collar and tried to calm him down, but he didn't even blink. He barked at that sky spot for maybe 20 straight minutes. Saliva was foaming at his mouth by the end. Then, all at once, he stopped. No warning. Just sat down and stared again. No growl, no bark. Dead still. That was the worst part. Something about the sudden quiet made me more uneasy than the barking had, like whatever he was reacting to had noticed him back. The air felt wrong. Not colder, just dense, hard to breathe, like the altitude had jumped without warning. I got lightheaded and sat down on a rock, and that's when I heard this sound. Way up high, faint as hell. Not mechanical, not natural either. It was like a note played too low for normal ears, except I could feel it behind my teeth. I didn't move for a while, just sat there staring where Tucker was staring. The fire burned lower, my bourbon cup tipped over, didn't care. Eventually, after I don't know how long, the pressure in the air let up. The weird sound faded. The shadows returned to normal, flickering like firelight again. Tucker blinked a few times, then shook his head like he was shaking off water, walked over to my side and sat down. His eyes were red around the rims. I checked my watch. It was 10:42. We'd been locked in that for nearly 2 hours. I didn't sleep much. Left the fire going low all night. Tucker didn't bark again, but he didn't lay down either. He sat up, staring at the fire like he was waiting for something else. At first light, we packed up and left. I didn't eat breakfast, drove straight back to town, and didn't look in the mirror once. 2 days later, I took Tucker to the vet. Not because of what happened. I told myself I just wanted to be safe. He checked out fine. But the vet did say something weird. His blood pressure was high. Not dangerously high, but elevated for his age and breed. Said it looked like he'd been under extreme stress recently. Asked if he'd been attacked by another dog. I said no. Didn't explain anything else. That was 6 months ago. He's okay now. Sleeps a lot. Sticks closer to me than he used to. Sometimes at night, if we're walking in the yard and he sees the stars, he'll stop and stare at the sky for a second. Never long. Just enough to make my heart race. I don't camp alone anymore. I was tracking elk movements in the Tavaputs Plateau back in the fall of 2017, working on a long-term migration sense study for the Division of Wildlife. Most of my work was solo, hiking into remote basins to retrieve collar data, checking trail cams, replacing batteries. The terrain out there is rough and steep, long distances between everything. No cell signal unless you're right up on the ridge. Most nights I camped out in my truck or sometimes just in a bivy sack under a tarp. That particular week, I was camped off a logging road near Bruin Point, southeast of Sunnyside, late September. The air had started turning, chilly at night, clear skies. That time of year, elk start pushing lower, so I was trying to get as many fixes as possible before they dropped out of the high country. We had 32 animals collared in that sector. GPS collars, expensive ones, timed to ping every 15 minutes during peak hours, then every hour overnight. They uploaded automatically to a satellite, and I could check the live data on my field tablet as long as I had the external antenna set up. It worked most days. Sometimes the cloud cover blocked it, but it was consistent enough to rely on. I remember it was a Thursday night. I'd hiked about 8 miles in and back that day, replacing a busted camera. Got back to camp around dusk, heated up a can of chili, and crawled into the bed of the truck around 9. It was dead quiet, no wind, no bugs, no owls, just still. I noticed that, but didn't think much of it at the time. At 9:45 p.m., I checked the tablet one more time before turning in. Every single collar was working. The map looked like a scatter plot, some moving, some bedded, all normal. Then I woke up at 1:17 a.m., wide awake, no reason, no noise. I just opened my eyes and knew I was up. The kind of awake you get before something changes. I sat up and listened. Still nothing. Not even distant truck noise from the gas fields. That's unusual. There's always a hum out there at night. Compressors, maybe. But it was just gone, like someone had put a blanket over the world. I grabbed the tablet to check the data. Habit, mostly. The screen booted up, and I noticed right away that the last location ping was from 12:06 a.m. That wasn't right. The collars ping every hour overnight. I waited a minute, thinking maybe the satellite link was down. But the weather was clear, and the unit showed a strong antenna signal. At 1:19, the data came in. All 32 collars uploaded at once, but something was off. When I opened the individual logs, they each showed a timestamp gap from 12:06 to 12:15. Exactly 9 minutes, nothing recorded. Then, the next point was normal again. Movement resumed like nothing happened. I'd never seen that before. Even if a caller lost signal, they'd still cache data and upload it later. You'd get overlapping points. This wasn't like that. It was like they'd all been turned off and back on again at the same time. Down to the second, I stepped out of the truck and walked a few feet into the trees. My ears felt like they were stuffed with cotton. I know that sounds strange, but it was like the air itself was heavy. I tried clapping once, just to hear something, and the echo felt wrong, delayed or smothered somehow. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes, just waiting. Then I noticed something. The ridgeline to the west had a faint glow behind it, not moonlight. The moon wasn't up yet, and even if it had been, it wouldn't have looked like that. This was whiter, almost silver, very diffuse, like a backlight behind the entire ridge. I crouched and killed my headlamp, just watched. At first I thought maybe it was headlights, maybe someone up on the ridge with a vehicle. But the glow wasn't moving, and there's no road up there, just a scrub ridge. No sign of movement, no shadows, no sound. I walked back to the truck and grabbed my binoculars, set up on the tailgate, and glassed the tree line. That's when I saw it. A shape, barely visible against the glow. Just a silhouette. It wasn't on the ground. It was suspended above the ridge, maybe 50 feet up. Not moving, not swaying, just there. I couldn't tell you the shape exactly. It wasn't a disc or a triangle. It didn't have edges I could follow. It was like trying to look at a shadow in fog. Every time I blinked, it looked slightly different. The size didn't change, though. I'd guess maybe 20 feet wide. I kept watching, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks. But then the shape flickered. Not like a light, more like something skipping. 1 second it was there, then gone, then back again, like a bad frame in a film reel. Then everything changed at once. The glow vanished, completely. The shape disappeared with it. A second later, the normal night sounds came rushing back in. Crickets, wind through the junipers, distant compressor hum. It was like someone flipped a switch. I stood there frozen for a while, binoculars still up. Nothing else happened. The ridge looked normal again. I finally checked my watch. It was 1:28 a.m., 9 minutes. Same as the data gap. I got back in the truck and sat there until sunrise. Around 5:40 a.m., I checked the tablet again. All the collars were working. The elk were moving again. Slow, steady movement, like they'd bedded and were now up grazing. Later that morning, I hiked out to one of the collar points closest to the ridge. It was a bull tagged 3 years earlier, big healthy animal. According to the map, it had bedded just below the slope during the missing time. When I got to the area, I noticed all the underbrush was flattened in a perfect circle, maybe 30 feet across. Not trampled like from hooves, just pressed, clean. No tracks, no scat, no sign of struggle. Just a circle of flattened grass and brush in the middle of otherwise normal terrain. I took a few photos and left. Didn't mention it in my notes. Back at HQ the next week, I pulled the full collar logs from the internal backups. Same gap, 12:06 to 12:15. All collars, exact same timestamps, no cache data, nothing. I emailed the manufacturer. They said it wasn't a firmware issue, and they'd never seen simultaneous losses like that unless it was a major satellite outage, but the satellites were fine that night. Full coverage, no interruptions. I still have those logs. I check them every so often. They haven't changed. It happened just outside Tonopah, Nevada on a Sunday night in late October. I drove out by myself with a thermos of coffee and my old Dobsonian scope strapped in the back of the truck. I'd been doing amateur astronomy for about 6 years by then. Nothing fancy, just backyard stuff. But Tonopah had some of the darkest skies in the state, and I liked the quiet. I parked about 15 minutes outside town down a gravel pull-off past a dry wash. No other cars around, nothing but low scrub and rock. I set up on a flat patch beside the truck. It was cold, maybe low 40s, but clear as glass. No wind, no moon. You could see the Milky Way stretching overhead like a brushstroke. I was trying to catch some Andromeda shots and mess around with the Pleiades while I still had a good angle. I had my red flashlight, a star map app on my phone, and my little Bluetooth speaker playing soft ambient stuff. Just background noise so I didn't spook myself. I was used to being out there alone. About 2 hours in, I noticed something strange. I was lying back on a camp chair, just looking up naked eye while the scope cooled down again, when I saw a gap in the stars, a patch of sky that looked wrong. Not cloudy, not blurry, just blank. At first I thought I was imagining it. Maybe my eyes were tired or I had something in my contacts. But the longer I stared, the more certain I was that it wasn't my eyes. It wasn't a solid shape, not exactly, but something was up there, blacker than the sky. Not darker, blacker. It blocked out the stars behind it, but only as it moved, slowly, almost like a leaf drifting underwater. It didn't reflect anything, no glint, no shine. Just this triangle, wide at the back, narrowing to a point, sliding through the stars like someone had cut it out of the sky. I could see the edge of it as it passed in front of the Big Dipper. I killed the music and stood up. The air was dead quiet, no wind, no bugs. Even the little rustling in the brush had stopped. I watched it drift for maybe a full minute. It was hard to judge the altitude. No lights, no sound. Just that weird silhouette, moving slow as a cloud. It wasn't huge, but it wasn't a drone. I've seen plenty of those. They hum, they flash, they wobble. This thing didn't do any of that. It moved steady, almost heavy, and kept its angle the whole time. I tried to grab my phone and get a shot, but the camera couldn't pick it up, just darkness. I turned the scope toward it and tried to track it that way, but it was too wide for the eyepiece. It filled the entire field of view, edge to edge. That's when I realized it had no texture. Nothing. Just blank. It took maybe 3 minutes to cross from the northwest to directly overhead, then kept going southeast. I watched until I lost it against the darker part of the sky. The stars came back behind it, one by one. I stood there for a long time. I remember thinking I should pack up, but I didn't want to turn my back on the sky. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like I felt exposed, like I'd stumbled into someone else's space without realizing. After a while, I went back to my scope and tried to refocus on Andromeda, but something was off. My finder scope wouldn't align. I checked the mount, everything looked fine, but my RA axis was sluggish, almost sticky. It's manual, no electronics, and it had never done that before. The altitude knob fought back like it was under tension. I finally got it pointing at where Andromeda should have been, but the core was too dim. Way too dim for the magnification I was using. I thought maybe the mirror fogged, so I checked with a flashlight. It was clean. The humidity was low. There was no reason for it. Then my flashlight flickered out. It was brand new. I'd replaced the batteries that afternoon. I tapped it a few times, turned it on and off. Nothing. My phone screen worked, but the flashlight app froze and wouldn't open. I tried to reboot it. It got stuck on the loading screen for 5 full minutes. I packed up fast. The Dobsonian was giving me trouble. The base felt weirdly stiff, like the whole thing had warped slightly. I couldn't get it to nest in the seat the way it usually did. I ended up bungee cording it loose in the back, just so I could leave. When I got in the truck and turned the key, the dashboard lights flickered. The engine started, but all the gauges were dead for about 30 seconds. Then they blinked to life, all at once. My clock reset to 1 a.m., even though I was sure it had been closer to midnight. The drive back was quiet. No cars on the road. No animals either. I watched the sky the whole way, half expecting something to reappear, but it didn't. I got home and didn't unpack. I just went inside and sat at the kitchen table for a while. Tried to write it down, but I didn't know what to call any of it. The next night I set up the scope in my backyard to check everything. The movement was back to normal. Smooth, no resistance, the flashlight worked, my phone flashlight worked too. Everything was fine. But Andromeda still looked dim. It wasn't the scope. I checked it on other targets, and they came in clear. I even borrowed a friend's refractor later that week, and the galaxy still looked washed out, like there was a haze around just that part of the sky. So, I don't stargaze alone out there anymore. I still go out with my astronomy club sometimes, but not by myself. I can't explain it. Nothing about that triangle made sense. It didn't fly, it didn't hover, it just moved. Quiet and slow, like it was watching, but not from above, more like from the side. We were camped out just north of the Mojave Preserve, off one of those dirt roads that don't show up on most maps. The plan was 2 nights in the RV, off-grid, no reception, just us and the desert. My girlfriend, Jenna, had never done any boondocking before, but I'd taken the trailer out on trips like this a handful of times. Nothing fancy, just a 19-foot Lance with solar, water tanks, and a little propane heater if it got cold. It was the second night. Clear skies, no wind, not a sound outside except the occasional rustle of creosote in the breeze. We'd gone to bed around 10, maybe a little later. We'd grilled hot dogs and played gin rummy until we were both too tired to keep our eyes open. No alcohol, no drugs, nothing like that. The windows were open, just the screens in, and we had the vent fan going on low to keep the air moving. I remember the stars were ridiculously bright. The kind of clear where you could see the Milky Way without trying. Jenna commented on it before we went to bed. I think the last thing she said was, "I've never seen it that dense before." I woke up in the dark. Not sure what time it was, but I remember it was cold, colder than it had been when we went to sleep. I reached over to the little digital clock on the shelf above the bed to check the time. It was off. I thought maybe the batteries, died. But that clock runs off the trailer's 12-volt system, and the solar charge had been full that afternoon. Still, maybe the battery drained. I grabbed my phone off the counter. Wouldn't turn on. Just a black screen. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. The vent fan had stopped. No soft hum, no air moving. I sat up and looked around. Jenna stirred a little but didn't wake. The blue LED on the smoke detector, normally a faint glow, was out. The little fridge light, off. Even the inverter's panel, which always blinks green, wasn't doing anything. The trailer was completely dead. I fumbled for my watch on the shelf next to the stove. One of those Casio analog digital hybrids. I hadn't taken it off in a year. It said 417. The digital screen was dark and the second hand was stuck between ticks. Just frozen there. I grabbed Jenna's Fitbit from the hook where she'd hung it. 417. No backlight, no pulse readout. Just stuck. I shook her awake. She was groggy at first, but sat up pretty quick when I told her everything was off. She started checking her phone, then the flashlight by the sink. Nothing worked. Not even the battery-powered lantern under the bench. The weird thing was, none of the batteries were hot or drained. They were just off, like they didn't exist. We opened the door to check outside. The air was still, cold. The kind of cold that doesn't feel like weather, more like absence. I stepped out with bare feet. Sand and grit under me. No moon, just the stars, but they didn't look right. It took me a second to realize what was off. They weren't twinkling, they were just there. Sharp and still, like pinholes in black paper. I've never seen the sky that static before. It didn't feel natural. The desert always has some shimmer, some movement in the air. But this felt like everything was holding its breath. We stood outside for a minute, not saying anything. Then Jenna pointed toward the rocks behind the trailer. There was a light. Soft, blue-white, low to the ground, not a beam. More like a dull glow. It wasn't moving, just sitting there behind a low ridge, maybe 200 feet away. I whispered, "Is that a car?" She didn't answer. I walked around the side of the trailer trying to get a better angle, but the boulders blocked most of the view. The light didn't pulse or flicker. It just hovered, right at the line where the earth met the sky. We stood there for maybe a minute, watching it. Then it disappeared. Not slowly. Just gone. The second it vanished, we heard this sound, hard to explain. Not mechanical, not wind. Just a deep pressure, like a silent hum that pressed against your chest. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, then faded. We ducked back into the trailer. Jenna locked the door, even though we were 50 miles from anything. I tried the stove light again. Still dead. I don't know why, but I pulled the curtain back and looked outside one more time. There were 3 small lights now, much farther off near the horizon. Low, just over the brush, perfectly spaced, like they were watching. Then 2 of them slowly blinked out. One stayed a few seconds longer, then followed. We didn't sleep. We just laid there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, holding hands. The clock still said 417. Nothing changed. Then at some point, it must have been hours later, the fridge compressor kicked on, just out of nowhere. The fan started spinning. The LED on the inverter came back to life. Jenna's Fitbit vibrated once, then lit up. 6:49 a.m., the clock above the bed reset itself to 12 and started blinking. Outside, the sun was just starting to come up behind the ridge. Everything looked the same. No tracks, no lights, no sign of anything. But every device that had a clock on it, the watch, the Fitbit, my phone, they were all stuck on 417 until they powered back, and none of them recorded any activity between 10 p.m. and that moment. I tried to check the trailer battery status, full charge, solar panels working, no reason for a total shutdown like that. We packed up right after breakfast and left. Didn't stay for the 3rd night. The place just felt empty. Not quiet. Empty. We drove into Barstow and stopped at a diner. Jenna asked me not to bring it up again. I didn't argue. I knew what I saw. So did she. We still take trips sometimes, but not out there. Not anywhere that remote. Not anymore. I was working a call-out near Cave Junction down in southern Oregon, early October of last year. There'd been a voltage irregularity flagged by the substation SCADA, and they couldn't clear it remotely, so dispatch sent me to check the line in person. I'd been on shift since 6 that morning, and this was around 6:40 p.m., right at the tail end of my day. I remember because I was hoping to make it back to Grants Pass before the diner closed. The location was remote, an old tap along a ridge that fed a few cabins and maybe a radio repeater. No cell coverage. I'd been out there before, maybe once or twice. The access road was dirt, steep in some places, barely wide enough for the bucket truck. You have to park about a quarter mile from the structure and hike in the rest of the way on foot. Sun was already low when I pulled up. That deep orange light was coming through the trees, and the air had that wet moss smell. It had rained earlier that day. I remember stepping out and hearing nothing but the drip of water off the leaves. I grabbed my gear, hiked up the slope, and came up on the tower from the east side. It's not a big one, maybe 60 feet tall, one of those older single-circuit lattice structures. When I got close, I could hear the hum off the lines, but nothing unusual. No arcing, no bird strikes. Looked like the breaker tripped upstream, but the hardware itself seemed fine. Still, I figured I'd do a full visual. I walked around the base, checked the insulators, tension hardware, grounding, everything looked normal. That's when I looked up to check the cross arms, and that's when I saw it. There was something hovering above the top of the tower. At first I thought it was a drone. It was the size of one, maybe 2 feet across, matte black, with this strange shape I couldn't quite pin down. Kind of angular, but with no visible rotors. It wasn't wobbling in the wind like most quadcopters do. It was completely still, just hanging there maybe 10 or 15 feet above the peak. No sound. None. That's what stuck with me. How quiet it was. I've been around hobby drones. Even the expensive ones make some noise. This was dead silent. I stood there staring at it for maybe 20 seconds. I didn't move. I thought maybe someone was flying it from the trees. Maybe a property owner nearby checking on me or just messing around. But the signal range out there is garbage. There's no way anyone could see what they were flying. I waved once, just in case. No reaction. Then the thing tilted slightly, like it was rotating to face me. I couldn't see a lens or anything, but I felt, and I know how this sounds, I felt like it was looking at me. That's when I noticed the air around it. The leaves on the top of the tower weren't moving, but there was this shimmer, like heat distortion, right under where it hovered, like a mirage on asphalt. It didn't spread out like prop wash. It just stayed in a tight, vertical column. I was about to take a picture with my work phone when it moved. No sound, no lead up. It just shot straight up. It didn't accelerate. It was just gone. One frame it was there, next it wasn't. I followed the motion instinctively and saw a flash, not light exactly, more like a rip in the clouds, a quick distortion that closed in on itself. I stood there with my mouth open for a long time. Then I realized I was holding my breath. I looked around, half expecting someone to step out of the woods laughing, but there was nothing, just the tower, the woods, the smell of damp pine. I walked the perimeter again. Nothing had changed. The equipment was still humming. The sky was darker now, and I realized I'd been standing there longer than I thought. When I got back to the truck, it was 7:25. The whole inspection should have taken me 20-30 minutes tops, but the last time stamp on my pre-trip checklist was 6:42. That means I was at the site for over 40 minutes, maybe more. I don't remember losing time, but I don't remember much detail after the thing disappeared. Just this stretched out sense of standing there, waiting. I filed my report that night, just said I didn't find any faults. Didn't mention the rest. What was I supposed to say? Saw a floating object and blacked out for a bit. The next morning, one of the SCADA techs said the fault cleared on its own around 7:30 p.m. He said the voltage snapped back to normal like someone flipped a breaker, but no remote commands had gone through. I asked if that was common. He just shrugged. The structure's still out there. Same spot. I've been back since. Nothing weird happened. But I haven't seen anything like that again. I still don't know what I was looking at. We were hiking out near the Trinity site. Not the actual blast zone that's fenced and locked, but there's BLM land all around it, mostly flat desert with these dry riverbeds and old crumbling fence posts half buried in sand. You can still find old radiation warning signs rusting in the brush if you look. We weren't trying to do anything spooky or off limits. My girlfriend Eliza had this goal to hike every marked trail in southern New Mexico before the year was out, and this one, a stretch near Mockingbird Gap, was on her list. It's not popular. No shade, no water. The guide site called it featureless, but historically notable. We parked just off the highway around 7:30 a.m., sun already hot even in October. We packed light, water, dried fruit, first aid, my Garmin watch, and Eliza's GPS app running on her phone. She liked to record our hikes. Usually the GPS logs matched up exactly, even if the cell signal was spotty. We started off heading east on a dirt track that cut through an old cattle gate. The trail follows what used to be a supply road during the Manhattan Project, though you wouldn't know it. Just gravel and scrub and endless yucca plants. We passed a dead coyote about an hour in, nothing fresh, just picked clean and sun-dried. I only mention it because Eliza made a joke about it being a bad omen. Should have brought sage, she said. It was flat the whole way. Easy walking. The heat shimmered over the sand like water, and the farther we went, the less there was to see. I remember Eliza checking her phone and saying we'd done 3.8 miles and were making good time. We took a break under what little shade the side of a small, rocky outcrop gave us. It wasn't much. After that, the trail sloped down into an arroyo, dry, cracked earth with a few odd animal tracks, and curved toward a low ridge. That's where things get hard to explain. We were walking side by side, not talking much, just the crunch of our boots and the wind. Then we both stopped at the same time. No sound, no wind, just dead still. That's what hit me first, the silence. You expect quiet in the desert, but this was different, oppressive. Not a single insect, not a single bird. The air felt heavy, like walking into a sealed room. Eliza turned to me and said, "Do you hear that?" I said, "I don't hear anything." She looked off to the right, toward a dry ridge about 30 yards off trail. I thought I heard something metallic, like a chain dragging. I didn't, but I nodded. We both stood there for maybe 30 seconds, just listening. Then I can't say what changed. There was no flash, no sound, no sudden feeling. But the light shifted, like the sun had moved behind clouds, only there weren't any. Everything felt flat, like contrast had been turned down. We kept walking. I don't remember deciding to. We just started moving again, like nothing happened. The next thing I remember clearly is the wind coming back. Just a little breeze, but enough to make the brush sway. And then the heat hit me all at once, like I'd just stepped back into it. I looked around, confused, because the arroyo looked deeper. The ridge we were approaching was closer than it should have been. Eliza was ahead of me now, maybe 20 feet, squinting at her phone. She stopped and called back. Did we miss a turn? I caught up. She showed me the GPS track. The blue line just skipped. One moment we were half a mile back. The next it resumed a mile farther along. No zigzag, no drift. Just a hard jump, like someone cut a chunk out of the recording. I checked my Garmin. Same thing. There was a gap, exactly 58 minutes missing. No heart rate, no elevation gain, no pace data. 1 second I was walking at 3.2 miles per hour. Next, nothing. Then back to normal, like we'd never stopped. We just stood there staring at our screens, trying to make sense of it. The sky was the same, no signs of a storm. We weren't dizzy, no headaches, nothing felt off in our bodies. I said maybe it was a bug, a GPS hiccup, but 2 devices, same stretch, same exact time. Didn't feel right. We turned back. Neither of us said much. The silence had crept back in, too. Not total, but wrong somehow. The wind sounded muffled, like it wasn't reaching us. Every step echoed. It's hard to explain. About halfway back, Eliza stopped and pointed to something sticking out of the sand. Looked like a rod at first. Metal, maybe 2 feet long, angled upward like an antenna. I thought maybe it was part of some old equipment or survey gear. We walked up to it, but as we got closer, I saw that it wasn't attached to anything. Just a thin, dull gray cylinder jammed into the earth. No markings. She reached for it, and I don't know why, but I said, "Don't." It wasn't like I thought it would shock her or anything. I just didn't want her touching it. My stomach felt tight, and the air was hot again. Way hotter than it should have been. She stopped. We took a few pictures, but nothing clear. Glare made them useless. We marked the spot on her app, but when we checked later, the pin wasn't there. Just didn't save. When we got back to the car, we both felt wiped. More than we should have been for 8 miles on flat land. I checked the timestamp on the dash cam. We should have been back around noon. It was 1 to 17 p.m. Neither of us remembered stopping. No food break, no shade, just a missing hour. That night, we tried uploading the GPS data to her laptop. The files were intact, but when we zoomed in on the gap, it was just empty space. No time codes, just a clean cut. I exported the data and tried to open it in a text editor. The file jumped from 10:43:12 to 11:41. No error, no corruption, like nothing ever happened. We haven't hiked out there since. The weird part is we've never had GPS issues anywhere else, even places more remote. It was just that stretch, just that day. 1 hour we don't remember, 1 mile we didn't walk. We were camping up near the Tarryall Mountains in Colorado. Me, Sean, Greg, and Chris. All four of us had taken Friday off work and drove up early to claim a good spot. It was late September, right after the leaves started turning, but before it got cold enough to snow. We parked a little ways off a dirt road that runs through Pike National Forest, hiked in maybe half a mile, and set up camp near a shallow ridge overlooking a valley. It wasn't a campground or anything official, just a clearing we'd found years back that we kept coming back to. No cell signal, no people. Just wind in the trees and the sound of your own boots. By the time we got the tents up and a fire going, it was already dark. We made dinner, passed around a bottle of bourbon, told the usual stories. Sean brought his Bluetooth speaker and was playing old Wilco stuff at low volume. We all turned in around midnight. Clear sky, cold air. You could see every star. I woke up around 3:30. I know the time because I checked my watch. I had to piss and my sleeping bag was too hot. The fire was just embers by then and everything was quiet. No wind, no bugs. Just that kind of mountain stillness that feels a little too perfect when you notice it. I stepped out of the tent and walked a little uphill, past where we'd stacked the bear bags, to a flat rock we always used as a lookout. You could see the whole ridge to the west from there, and parts of the forest sloping down into the valley. It was colder than I expected. My breath came out heavy. That's when I noticed the light. It wasn't moving, just hovering above the ridge, maybe a quarter mile away, right above the tree line. Soft white, but not like a spotlight or a plane. It was more uniform, a kind of round glow, almost like a sphere, but not perfectly shaped. No beam, no flicker, just hanging there, completely still. I thought it might be a drone at first, but there was no sound, not even a hum, and it was way too big. Hard to judge the exact size at that distance, but it had to be at least the size of a car, maybe bigger. I watched it for a solid minute. It didn't move, didn't dim, didn't pulse, just sat there above the ridge like it was waiting. I went back down to the tents and crouched by Sean's. "Hey," I whispered. "You up?" He stirred a little and mumbled something. I nudged the side of the tent. "Seriously, come here. You gotta see this." After some grumbling, he unzipped the tent and came out, pulling on his jacket. "What?" I pointed up toward the ridge. "Look, right above the trees." He stared for a few seconds. "Where?" "There." "Right, wait." I pointed again, lining it up with the notch in the trees we used as a marker during hikes. It was right there, like 20 seconds ago. But it was gone. Just stars and the thin black line of the ridge. Sean squinted. "You sure you weren't dreaming?" "No, man. I was standing right there. It wasn't a star. It was hovering." "Maybe a plane?" "Planes don't just stop mid-air like that." He yawned. "Well, nothing there now. Come back to bed before you freeze." He zipped up his tent and went back in. I stood there for another few minutes, scanning the tree line. I even climbed back up to the flat rock. Still nothing, just silence and dark forest. I went back to my tent, but I didn't sleep. The next morning, I brought it up at breakfast. Greg joked that I must have had more bourbon than I remembered. Chris asked if it might have been a weather balloon. I told them again. No sound, no movement, no blinking. They kind of brushed it off. We went on a long hike that day up toward Goose Creek Trail. I kept checking the ridge as we climbed, looking for anything that seemed off. Didn't see anything. The day was normal, just hiking, water breaks, photos of aspens. That night, we sat around the fire again, this time burning bigger logs since it had gotten colder. Everyone went to bed around 11. I stayed up a little longer, poking at the fire, staring at the ridge. At 2:14 a.m., I remember the time exactly, I saw the light again. Same place, same shape, same silence. But this time, it didn't stay still. It moved, slowly, almost like it was drifting, from left to right, following the curve of the ridge. Still completely silent. I watched it for maybe 5 full minutes. It moved so gradually that I had to pick points along the ridge to tell it was moving at all. At one point, it dipped lower just above the tree tongue and rose again. I ran to wake up Chris. He came out, annoyed. I dragged him up to the flat rock. Pointed. There, it's moving right above those pines. He stared hard. I don't see anything, he said. It's right. How do you not see that? It's just stars, man. You're freaking yourself out. I swear the thing was right there, maybe 200 or 300 feet above the ridge. Clear as anything. But Chris just shook his head and went back down to his tent. As soon as he was gone, the lights stopped moving. It hovered for maybe 10 more seconds. Then, and this is hard to explain, it just dimmed. Like a slow fade. Not like it flew away. More like it was turning itself off. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I didn't see it again after that. Not on the last night. Not on the hike out. But something weird happened when I got home. I had taken a bunch of photos during the trip. Shots of the camp, the trees, the trail. I had my phone out a lot, especially during that second night when I was trying to zoom in on the ridge to catch the light. I was almost sure I'd hit record at least once. But when I checked my gallery, there were only pictures from the first day. Nothing from the second night. No photos after 7 p.m. Friday. No videos at all. I thought maybe I hadn't hit record or I'd just forgotten. But later that week, Sean sent around a bunch of group photos, and one of them showed me standing at the campfire that second night, holding my phone up, facing the ridge. Like I was filming something. I never found those files. I even plugged the phone into my laptop and checked hidden folders. Nothing. The others don't talk about it anymore. They just act like I had some weird dream. But I know what I saw. It was there, and they were standing right next to me. I was heading east on 50 through Nevada, maybe an hour past Ely, hauling a load of concrete forms out of Sacramento. It was close to midnight, early March, and the temperature had dropped hard once the sun dipped. The wind was cutting across the flats, low and steady, and I hadn't seen another pair of headlights in probably 30 miles. I'd done that route a dozen times. Nothing out there but sagebrush and long, empty miles. I was just past a wide bend where the desert opens up, right before it narrows again into that stretch near the Pancake Range. Not a town for hours either way, unless you count Austin, and that's not much more than a gas station and a diner. I first noticed the lights around mile marker 132. They weren't headlights exactly. Not halogens or LED bars like you'd see on another rig or pickup. Just 2 dim, round lights, almost amber-colored, maybe 100 yards behind me and low to the ground. At first I figured it was someone driving with their fog lights on and their highs off. I kept checking the mirrors, waiting for them to come closer, but the lights just stayed the same distance back, like they were pacing me. I tapped my brakes once, a quick check. No change. The road was straight. Nothing to pull off onto. No shoulder, just that soft drop-off where the sand starts. I figured I'd wait until one of the rare gravel cutouts and let whoever it was pass. But 5 miles later, they were still back there. Not gaining, not falling back. I keyed my mic and tried channel 19. Westbound on 50, anyone running up behind a flatbed east of Ely? Nothing. No truckers, no chatter, just static. I tried 13, then 9, nothing. That's when I started to get this weird pressure behind my eyes, like the kind you get when you're driving at altitude too long, like your sinuses are swelling up. I opened the window a crack. Cold air came in sharp and dry. The lights behind me blinked once, not like a signal, just a single pulse. Then back to steady. Another mile passed. Still no shoulder. The desert to my left looked flat enough to pull into, but I wasn't about to risk getting stuck off-road with a full load. I hit the brakes again. Harder this time. Downshifted. Let the truck slow. The lights behind me slowed too. They stayed the same distance back. Always that same 100 yards. I felt something shift in my gut. Not fear exactly. Just that kind of stillness when you know something's wrong but haven't figured out what yet. The next cutout came up maybe a minute later. Wide enough for 2 trucks if you lined up tight. Gravel packed down pretty well. I turned into it and let the truck roll to a stop, hazards on. I watched the mirror. Nothing followed me in. I leaned over and looked through the passenger mirror. The road was empty. The lights were gone. I turned off the hazards, killed the engine, stepped down into the dust. The only sound was the wind moving across the plain. I walked back along the trailer, looking toward the highway. No lights, no taillights, no engine noise, just open dark and the soft hiss of wind through the brush. I crouched and checked the sand near the edge of the cutout. There were no tire tracks behind my truck. None. Not mine. Not anyone else's. I stood there for a long time, just listening. I even climbed up on the step of the cab and turned in a full circle, looking out over the land. I couldn't see a thing. No movement, no distant lights, just the faint orange glow low on the horizon behind me from wherever the last town had been. I got back in the truck and locked the doors, started the engine. The clock on the dash said 12:42. I was sure it had been only 5 or 10 minutes since I pulled over, but it had been 12:17 when I saw the mile marker. I put the truck back in gear and eased out onto the road again. No other cars passed me for the next 2 hours. Somewhere outside Eureka, I stopped for coffee at a little 24-hour Sinclair. I asked the cashier if there were any construction crews running late-night convoys through the basin, maybe a pilot car or someone with amber strobes. She shook her head and said no one worked nights out there, too far from anything. I got to my drop in Ely the next morning. The guy receiving the load asked if I'd hit weather, said I was almost an hour behind schedule. I checked my logs. Nothing showed up as a delay, no timestamp out of place. GPS didn't flag any long stops, but I remember exactly where I pulled over. I remember the gravel, the cold. I went back through the dash cam footage a few days later once I was back in Reno. Everything looked normal. My truck, the road, nothing behind me, not even headlights. But for 12 minutes, the video goes fuzzy. Not full static, just this blur, like heat distortion from 12:30 to 12:42. You can hear the engine idling, the wind, nothing else, and no tire tracks behind me. I noticed it just after 5. I always check the cattle around dawn, usually with a cup of coffee still in my hand. We'd had storms the night before, mostly lightning, dry thunder. Nothing too crazy, but enough to rattle the dogs and knock out the power for a few hours. I figured I'd be checking for downed fencing or maybe a spooked calf stuck somewhere dumb. Our land sits outside Stamford, Texas. Families had it going on 4 generations. Mostly open pasture with a few mesquite groves, nothing too fancy. We run Black Angus, about 60 head. Not a big operation, but it's mine. Anyway, I was crossing the east field when I saw it. It looked like someone had dragged a black rug out onto the grass and laid it flat, right there in the middle of the open space. Perfect circle, probably 30 feet across. At first, I thought it was flood damage, like maybe the lightning started a small fire. But as I got closer, that didn't track. The grass wasn't charred in a normal way, it wasn't ash or blackened like from a brush fire. It was just gone, singed down to these short, brittle stubs, dead all the way to the dirt, but only inside that circle. Outside of it, the grass was untouched, not even discolored, no debris, no tire marks, no footprints either, which was strange, considering I was the first one out that morning and the soil was still damp in spots from the storm. If someone had come through the field, I should have seen something. I bent down and touched the center. The dirt felt warm, not hot, just like it had been baked more than the rest. I looked up, half expecting to see smoke or something lingering in the air, but there was nothing, just blue sky and a few clouds drifting off to the west. I walked the edge of the circle a couple times, dead even. Not a single wobble in the shape. It didn't look natural. You don't see perfect geometry like that out here. I went back to the house and got my phone to take pictures. I tried uploading them later, but they came out weird. Not glitched exactly, just dull and grayish. Like the camera didn't capture the contrast right. The burned grass looked the same color as the soil, even though to my eyes it was clearly different. I didn't tell anybody that day. Figured maybe it was lightning, just in a way I hadn't seen before. I've been around long enough to know things happen out here that don't always line up neatly. I figured I'd wait, see if the grass came back. It didn't. 3 days later, I noticed something else. The cattle wouldn't go near it. Normally they graze right through that part of the field. Not anymore. They were looping wide around it, like it was fenced off. I watched one cow start toward it, then stop short and back up. It wasn't panic, just cautious, like it smelled something wrong. That night I walked out there after sunset. The moon was out mostly clear. I took my flashlight, but didn't end up needing it. When I got to the edge of the circle, the hair on my arms stood up, just this low-grade hum in my body. Not sound exactly, more like a vibration in the chest, the kind you get standing too close to a subwoofer, except nothing was playing. I stepped into the middle and the feeling stopped, dead quiet. No bugs, no breeze, no distant coyotes. I could see stars in every direction, but it felt like I was under a dome. I stayed for maybe 30 seconds before backing out. The next day I told my neighbor Gus. He's got a ranch about 6 miles north. We trade feed runs sometimes. I didn't tell him everything, just that I'd found some odd fire damage and asked if he'd seen anything similar. He looked at me for a long second and said, I had something like that in '97. Smaller though, burned out by the horse stalls, never figured it out. He didn't offer more and I didn't press. That week I had trouble sleeping, nothing specific, just this nagging feeling like something was out of place in the house. The windows felt too exposed. I kept the curtains drawn, locked the doors earlier than usual. Then came the lights. It started with a flash, not lightning. There weren't any storms that night. Just one quick, bluish flash that lit up the field like a camera going off. I jumped out of bed thinking a transformer blew, but the power was fine. I checked the breakers, the lines, nothing. 2 nights later, it happened again. This time I was awake, watching from the front porch. The light came from low on the horizon, pulsed once, then again, then disappeared. No sound. I grabbed the binoculars and scanned the pasture, focusing toward the east field. Nothing visible, but as I was about to lower them, something shifted. Not moved, just shifted. Like heat shimmer, but colder. A ripple about 10 feet above the burn circle, like air being stirred by something not quite there. It lasted maybe 4 seconds, then it was gone. I walked out again the next morning. No prints, no broken grass, no signs of anything landing or touching down. The circle was still there, same exact dimensions, no sign of growth. A week later, I tried digging into the soil inside the circle. The top layer crumbled like ash, even though it hadn't rained in days. About 5 inches down, the dirt turned hard and dry, like clay. But I know my soil, and it's never felt like that before. I took a sample to a guy I know in Abilene who runs tests for farms. He said the pH was off the charts in both directions. Patches of alkalinity and acidity mixed in like oil and water. You growing anything weird out there? He asked. I didn't answer. The circle stayed for the rest of the season. Nothing grew in it. Even weeds kept their distance. The cattle kept avoiding it. Birds wouldn't land nearby. One morning I found a jackrabbit dead just outside the edge. No wounds, no blood, just lying there, stiff, eyes open. Eventually the grass around it started to creep back, but the circle remained. Lighter now, more brown than black, but still there, etched into the field like a scar. I never reported it. Who do you even call for something like that? The sheriff? The weather service? I just started using the other pastures more. I check the east field now and then, but I don't walk out there much anymore. The wind's different near it. The dogs don't like going past the gate. And sometimes in the early hours before sunrise, I see those flashes again. Faint now, farther away, but always in the same spot. I worked night shifts at a remote weather station in Northeast Washington for about 2 years, starting in 2018. The station was about 20 miles west of Republic, tucked into the Kettle River Range, not far from the Canadian border. The place was pretty isolated, 2-room outbuilding with a radio tower and some ground sensors around it. We rotated through 2-week stints. Someone always had to be on site to monitor readings and do manual checks if the automated systems flagged something weird. My name's Nate. The guy before me on the rotation was a woman named Carly. We usually overlapped for a few hours to hand things off, but this particular shift, she had to leave early for a family thing, so I was on my own starting around 4 p.m. It was mid-September. The weather had been unstable all week. Thick fog in the mornings, scattered rain, and low, rolling clouds that stuck around into the night. Nothing unusual for the time of year. By around 11 p.m., I'd already logged the evening's reports and done the sensor calibration checks. I was reading on my tablet when the wind monitor spiked suddenly, jumped from a steady 4 miles per hour to 19 in less than 10 seconds, then dropped right back. I looked out the window, but the trees barely moved. I thought maybe a gust hit the tower directly, but there was no follow-up, just one short burst. I stepped outside with a flashlight and checked around. Everything looked normal. No wildlife near the sensors, no tree limbs down. The wind was calm again. I made a note and headed back in. About half an hour later, I stepped outside again to take a smoke break. I didn't smoke often, but sometimes it helped kill the quiet. The station sits in a little clearing about 100 yards across, surrounded by dense pine. The tower's to the north, just behind the building, and the rest is trees and sky. I looked up, and that's when I saw the lights. There were 3 red lights in the clouds, not blinking, not moving, just sitting there, spaced evenly in a perfect triangle. At first, I thought maybe they were aircraft warning lights from some tower farther off, but I knew every structure out there. The only other tower with red lights was over 5 miles east, and those blinked. These didn't. And they were in the clouds, not above them. Dim, but visible through the low cover, like something was sitting just above the trees with its lights pointing down through the mist. I watched them for at least a minute before I even moved. They didn't shift at all. No movement, no pulsing. I walked a few steps out into the clearing, trying to get a better angle. They stayed perfectly still. I don't know how long I stood there. 5 minutes, maybe more. Eventually, I pulled out my phone to take a photo, but the screen was black, wouldn't turn on. It was fully charged earlier. I'd used it to check radar maps. I held the power button, tried resetting it, nothing. I went back inside to grab my tablet. It was on the desk where I left it. The screen lit up, but the camera app wouldn't open. It just froze on a black screen. I stood by the door and kept looking at those lights. They hadn't moved an inch. No sound. No vibration. Just 3 faint red spots in a triangle formation glowing through the low cloud cover. Around the 10-minute mark, they disappeared all at once. Not like they flew away. Just gone. 1 second they were there, the next, the sky was empty. The clouds still hung low and heavy, but the lights were gone. I walked out into the clearing again, trying to see if they'd moved or if I could spot anything through a break in the cover. Nothing. Total silence. Even the insects had gone quiet. About 20 minutes later, I went back out one more time. The fog was thicker, but the air felt colder, like a front had moved in. When I looked up, I noticed something else. The tower lights, our own red beacons on the weather mast, were flickering. Not out, not dimmed, just glitching. Like someone had turned a strobe on for a second, then let them settle, then pulsed them again. That tower had been solid every day I'd worked there. I called the main station down in Spokane to report it. The line connected fine, but the supervisor on duty said our equipment was showing normal from their end. I stayed up the rest of the night, kept going to the window every few minutes. The lights never came back. In the morning, I walked out to the tower base to check the hardware. Everything looked fine. No wiring loose, no interference readings. I ran a full diagnostic. It passed all checks. When I plugged my phone in to charge, it powered back on like nothing happened. Battery was at 76%, no sign of a crash. My tablet started working again too. Camera opened like normal. I didn't say anything when Carly came back the next week. I just told her everything ran smooth and the wind spike was probably just a microburst. I checked the logbooks later. No mention of red lights, no outages, nothing out of the ordinary. About a month later, I was reviewing archived satellite weather images from that night for a different report. I pulled the frames around 11:30 p.m., right when I'd seen the lights. One frame looked off. There was a faint triangular blur in the cloud layer over our coordinates. Not bright, just a subtle distortion, like something massive had disrupted the moisture pattern and then vanished. The next frame, back to normal. Nothing there. I didn't bring it up. I saved a screenshot, then shut my laptop and moved on. I still have it saved on an old flash drive somewhere, but I haven't looked at it since. I was working a contract gig out near Shiprock, New Mexico, flying drone surveys for a geology outfit that was doing erosion mapping for some pipeline company. They wanted 3D terrain models of the mesas and flood zones before they pushed a road through there. Most of the flights were boring, just grid scans and overlapping image passes, which I'd later process into topographic maps. I had a little trailer I rented in town and drove out into the desert every morning before the sun got too high. The heat messes with the drone's battery life if you start too late. That particular day was already weird before I even left the trailer. My phone wouldn't hold signal, which wasn't that rare, but it was usually fine in town. Then my laptop wouldn't recognize the GPS dongle at first, which had never happened before. I ended up having to restart everything twice before the drone software would even launch. It was mid-June, dry as hell, clear skies, no wind to speak of. I set up my ground station in the bed of the truck, like usual, antenna on a tripod, laptop on a cooler, battery pack underneath. The drone was a fixed-wing VTOL, looked like a big white glider with rotors about 6 feet across. I launched it around 6:30 a.m. and sent it off on a 9-kilometer sweep along the base of a plateau. Everything looked normal for the first 15 minutes. I had the FPV feed on the main screen, map telemetry on the side. Around waypoint 6, the video started glitching, not in the usual way. Normally, if the signal's weak or there's interference, you'll get pixelation or it'll freeze. This was different. The image kind of shivered, like a ripple went across the screen, horizontally. Just for a second. Then the feed cut to black for maybe 2 seconds. No loss of control, no GPS dropout. The telemetry was still coming in clean. Just no image. Then it snapped back on, and for maybe half a second, something darted across the screen. It was metallic looking, silvery, oval shaped but hard to judge scale. It moved right to left in a blur, way faster than anything should have been flying that low. No rotors, no wings. I let out a sharp "what the hell" and rewound the buffer, but the object wasn't there. Just a clean frame jump from black screen to normal video. I stared at it for a minute, thinking maybe my eyes had played a trick on me. But I know I saw something. The image had changed. There was movement. I paused the mission and brought the drone into a loiter circle. Switched to manual camera control. I panned around slowly, looking in every direction, hoping maybe I'd catch whatever it was again. Nothing. Just empty red rock and dry scrub. I checked the surrounding airspace on ADS-B. No aircraft, no helicopters. Closest thing airborne was a private jet out of Flagstaff at 32,000 feet. I let the drone hover for a bit longer, then resumed the mission. It finished the rest of the grid with no problems. No more video glitches. Back at the trailer, I pulled the full flight log and reviewed it frame by frame. That section, the one where the feed cut out and came back, was just missing. It was like someone had cleanly removed 2 or 3 seconds from the middle of the recording. The timestamps jumped with no gap. That's not supposed to happen. Even with a signal drop, the onboard memory should have retained the full raw feed. The camera records locally to an SD card. I popped the card into my laptop and checked the direct footage. Same thing, clean cut. Like that moment just didn't exist. I even tried running it through recovery software, thinking maybe it had corrupted, but there was no trace. The file structure thought it had recorded everything normally. I didn't say anything to my client, just labeled the scan set and uploaded it like usual. The next morning, I went back out to the same location. Not because I needed to, I just wanted to fly another sweep and see if anything else strange happened. Set up in the same spot, same flight plan. This time I watched the telemetry more carefully. About halfway through, at nearly the same position, the compass reading on the drone drifted by 20 degrees for no reason. No wind gust. No magnetic anomaly on the USGS map. Then it corrected itself. Then the live video froze, not glitched, just froze, for 4 seconds. When it came back, the camera had shifted its angle by 15 degrees, as if the gimbal had been bumped. But that shouldn't have been possible. The drone hadn't changed heading. There was no turbulence, and the camera angle was locked in forward view. I brought it back early, landed it manually, checked the gimbal calibration, everything read fine. Back at the trailer, I reviewed the video again. No object this time, but the freeze was there, and the angle shift. I didn't fly again for a couple of days. Then, 3 nights later, around midnight, I woke up to a buzzing. Not a phone buzz, more like a deep vibration in the walls. My trailer isn't exactly well insulated, but it was this low hum I felt more than heard. I stepped outside. The sky was clear, a half moon. Quiet, no wind. But to the north, over the ridge where I'd flown, there were 3 soft orange lights. Not blinking, just hovering in a triangle. They sat there for maybe 10 seconds, then one of them faded out, then another. The last one stayed for a beat longer, then shot upwards, straight up, so fast I almost thought I'd imagined the whole thing. No sound. The next morning, I drove out to the ridge, left the drone in the truck, just walked the area. Everything looked normal. But about 300 feet from the bluff's edge, I found this perfect circle in the dirt, maybe 6 feet wide. Not burned, just flattened, like something heavy had pressed down evenly and then vanished. No tire tracks, no footprints, no debris. I checked the soil, no sign of moisture or chemical staining, just compacted sand and gravel. I didn't report it. There's nothing to report, really. Just oddities, glitches, things that don't show up in logs. The last few weeks of the contract went by without anything else happening. I flew the rest of the scans, packed up, and left Shiprock. Sometimes I still pull up that footage, the missing frame segment, the angle shift. I know what I saw, I just don't know why it's gone. He came in just before sunrise. That was the first odd thing, really. Most folks don't come knocking at the station at 5:15 in the morning unless it's a real emergency. I'd been on the night shift, quiet night, hadn't had a call since 11, and I was in the back office finishing paperwork when I heard the door buzzer. Our station in Sanders, Oklahoma isn't big. 1 front desk, 2 holding cells, and 3 desks in back. When the buzzer went off, I figured maybe it was someone reporting a loose cow again. The man standing there wasn't someone I recognized, and in a town of 900 people, that's rare. He looked about 60, maybe older. Weathered skin, gray beard, wearing faded jeans and a button-up tucked into a belt that didn't match his boots. Everything about him looked worn, but not exactly dirty. Not homeless. Not exactly out of place either. Just off. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood there squinting through the glass. I unlocked the door and let him in. "You all right, sir?" I asked. He looked past me down the hall like he was checking for something. Then he nodded, but kind of slow. "I need to report something," he said. His voice was dry, a little hoarse. "Something was over my house." "Okay," I said, leading him to the front counter. "You live in town?" He didn't answer that. Just said there were lights, bright ones. I thought it was the power company at first, but it was up in the sky. It wasn't a helicopter, no noise, just light, white and orange, pulsing. He rubbed at his temples. I took out a form and clicked my pen. "When did this happen?" "Tonight," he said. Then paused. "I think. What's your name?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. "I'm not sure," he said finally. I set the pen down. "You don't remember your name?" "No. I mean, I feel like I should. I know things. I know who the president is. I know what year it is. Wait." He looked up, confused. "It's 2004, right?" "This is 2022. He went quiet. Blinked a few times, like he thought I was kidding. "I'm serious," I said. "You don't remember your name or where you live?" He sat down heavily in the lobby chair. I asked if he was on any medication, if he'd been drinking, if he had any ID on him. He shook his head to all of it. His pockets were mostly empty. 1 old key. No phone. No wallet. The inside of his shirt had a tag from a Sears brand I hadn't seen in years. I radioed dispatch and asked if we'd had any missing persons lately. Nothing matched. "I remember a porch," he said after a while. It had peeling green paint. There was a rocking chair. The light came down through the trees and lit up the whole backyard like daytime. I went outside to look, and then he trailed off again. I asked if anyone could vouch for him, any family, any friends. He said he didn't know. He asked for a glass of water, so I brought him one. When the day shift came on, I handed it off to Deputy Marks and went home, but I couldn't stop thinking about the guy. Later that afternoon, I called down to Stillwater Regional, told them what happened. They ran his prints. He'd agreed to that, but there was no match. Not in any database. Over the next few days, we tried everything. He never got aggressive or strange, just confused. He didn't seem scared either, which was almost worse. It was like he'd already given up trying to figure it out. We let him stay in one of the holding cells for a night, just for safety. Gave him some food. Local pastor even stopped by and offered him a cot at the church. But the weirdest part came that Friday. A few of us got together and passed his photo around town, thinking maybe someone might know him, maybe a long-lost uncle or something. Nobody recognized him. Not at the diner, not at the feed store, not even at the VFW where we showed the older crowd. He didn't look like a stranger from far away. That's the thing. He looked like someone who should have belonged here. That kind of face, like he used to coach Little League, or he fixed tractors for the Coopers. But no one could place him. Later I showed him an old aerial map of the area, just to see if anything jogged his memory. He pointed to a dirt road out near Lake Otis. He said, "I think I lived down that road." I drove him out the next morning, just me and him in the cruiser. We hit the turnoff, gravel crunching under the tires. There were a couple old properties down there, most of them abandoned now. Nothing but rusted trailers and overgrown lots. When I pulled up to one of the houses, a little cinder block thing with a collapsed porch and a metal shed out back, he got real quiet. "This is it," he said. I helped him out of the car. He walked up slow, looking around like he half expected someone to be waiting. He stepped over the broken boards and went around to the back. There was an old clothesline and a big oak tree with black scorch marks running up one side. He stared at the tree for a long time. I didn't push. We went back to the station after that. He didn't say much. That night, I went digging through the county records. The property had been owned by a man named Edgar Thorne, but he died in 1996. No surviving family. I looked up photos of him. It was the same man, same face, a little younger in the photo. Sure, but unmistakable. I printed it and brought it to him the next morning. He stared at it for a long time, then said, "That's me." We confirmed it through some old veterans records. Edgar had been a mechanic in the Army, discharged in '79, no history of dementia or mental illness, no criminal record. He'd been declared deceased after a fire in that same house, supposedly started by faulty wiring. I showed him the death certificate. He didn't react, just sat there holding it. "I remember waking up outside," he said eventually, "lying in the grass, no sound, just the tree smoking." That was all he gave me. We contacted the VA and arranged for a social worker to meet with him. He agreed to go to Tulsa for further evaluation. He thanked me before he left, shook my hand like a man at peace. I still don't understand it, but I know what I saw. And I know nobody in town knew his name. I was in Death Valley last October, camped out at a primitive site just off Warm Springs Canyon Road. I'd gone solo. Not because I'm one of those off-grid loner types or anything. I just needed the quiet. My job had been eating me alive all year, and I hadn't slept more than 5 hours a night in months. Something about that stretch of open desert always made me feel like I could breathe again. No phone service, no people. Just quiet, dry air and endless space. I'd gotten in late that afternoon. Parked the truck on a raised spot with decent elevation, pitched the tent, and made a quick dinner before the sun dipped. It was one of those unusually warm nights for October, maybe mid-70s even after dark. No wind. The air felt completely still. Around 9:30 or 10, I couldn't sleep. I figured a short walk would help. I didn't go far, just followed the wash heading southeast, flashlight in one hand, Nalgene in the other. The moon was just past half, bright enough that I didn't really need the light unless I was checking for snakes. After maybe 15 minutes of slow walking, I stopped. No reason, just stood there. It was dead quiet, like no sound at all. That's common out there, but this was the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I looked up. The sky was completely clear. You can see everything in Death Valley, more stars than most people ever get to witness. I always liked spotting satellites. They look like little dots dragging slowly across the sky, steady and predictable. But this one star caught my eye. It wasn't moving like a satellite. It was just brighter, almost bluish, not twinkling like the others. At first I thought maybe it was Venus or Jupiter or something, but it didn't match anything I'd seen before. It sat right above the southern ridgeline, unmoving. Then it started to drift downward. Slowly, straight toward the horizon, no wobble or arc. Just a steady, smooth descent. I stood completely still, watching it. It moved for about 10 seconds, then paused. Just hovered there, maybe a finger width above the ridgeline if I held my hand out. Then, without warning, it shot straight upward, not angled, not arced, straight up, and way faster than anything I've ever seen in the sky. I've watched Air Force drills out by Edwards. This was nothing like that. There was no trail, no sound. It vanished into the sky like someone had yanked it up with a string. I stayed frozen for a long time. Eventually, I told myself maybe it had been some kind of drone or atmospheric thing, maybe even a shooting star, though that didn't make sense. But that quiet, the air didn't even move. No wind, no engine, nothing. I started heading back to the tent. That's when I noticed something else. The wash I'd followed didn't look the same. The boulders were off. The slope felt steeper than I remembered. I turned in a slow circle with my flashlight, trying to spot the cairn I'd passed on the way in, but it wasn't there. I figured I just veered a bit too far off and backtracked. But the more I walked, the more wrong it felt. There was this stretch where the sand underfoot turned coarse, almost like crushed glass. Not sharp, but grainy and fine, like it had been melted and cooled too fast. I crouched down and picked up a handful. It sparkled in the beam like black sugar. I'd hiked that area before. I knew the terrain. That texture didn't belong there. I checked my GPS, an old Garmin E-Trex I keep in my pack, but it wouldn't lock, just sat there searching. I waited a full minute before giving up. Then I heard a noise. It wasn't loud, more like a low clicking, almost like an old light switch being flipped over and over. I turned off my flashlight and crouched behind a rock. The clicking came from farther up the wash. About 20 yards ahead, it moved, like it was circling something, or pacing. Then it stopped. The desert was quiet again. I didn't move for what felt like forever. My knees started to ache from crouching. When I finally got up, I walked carefully back the way I thought I'd come. It took longer than it should have. I kept checking the ridge lines, trying to reorient myself by the stars. Nothing felt quite right. I eventually spotted my truck's reflective window catching the moonlight. I hadn't realized how far off course I'd gotten. The walk had felt like 15 minutes out, but it took nearly 40 to get back. Back at camp, the tent was fine. Everything was exactly where I left it, except the truck. The passenger door was cracked open. Not wide, just barely ajar. I never leave it that way. I stood there staring at it, trying to remember if I'd maybe opened it earlier and forgot. But I hadn't touched that side. I checked the cab, nothing missing. My duffel was in the back seat, undisturbed, but the driver's seat was reclined, not flat, just leaned back slightly. I hadn't done that. There were 2 smudges on the inside of the windshield, like oily fingerprints. They didn't match mine. I sat in the truck for a while just thinking. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I packed up and left early. On the drive out, my GPS started working again. No hiccups. The wash I'd walked through wasn't marked on the topo maps, just a blank space between ridgelines. A week later, I cleaned out the truck back home. Under the passenger seat, I found a small pebble, black and glassy like the sand I'd picked up. I hadn't collected any rocks. I left it on my desk for a few days, then threw it away. It was 1994. I was stationed at Nellis, but working a temporary assignment out at the Tonopah Test Range. I just turned 38. Back then, I was a radar technician, E6, 17 years in. Mostly maintenance and diagnostics, but occasionally I'd sit in and monitor during late-night flights if they needed extra eyes on a scope. Most of the time, it was dead quiet. This happened on a Tuesday, sometime in October. I remember because the weather had just started to cool off at night, and that week we'd been told to expect some classified testing near Groom. That wasn't unusual. They'd route certain aircraft through Tonopah's radar coverage for tracking, and we weren't supposed to ask questions about what exactly we were looking at, just log and report. Black project stuff. You learn not to get curious. That night, I was in the radar control van with a guy named Daniels. He was new to the site, came from Edwards, I think, and still getting familiar with the setup. We were running a standard systems test around 0200, just verifying sweep ranges and checking for ghost returns. I was about halfway through logging the last check when I saw it. A single return blinked onto the screen, right on the edge of the Groom Lake airspace. No transponder. Altitude read 30,000 feet. At first, I figured it was a glitch. Happens sometimes when the scope gets hot, especially during long sweeps. But before I could reset it, the blip moved. Instantly. No delay, no descent arc, just one sweep it was at 30,000 feet, the next it was showing 0. Ground level, right in the middle of restricted airspace. Daniels leaned over and frowned. "Was that a skip?" I said. "I don't think so," and backed up the sweep log. It wasn't a radar skip. The return had weight, signature depth, Doppler reading, the whole thing. Not noise, not a bird, not a cloud, it had structure. Then it was gone. Just blinked off the scope like it had never been there. We ran a systems check. Nothing came up out of spec. The diagnostics were clean, power stable, no magnetic interference. I pulled the signal log from the previous 30 minutes and ran it again on playback. Same thing. One clean hit at high altitude, then immediate drop to ground, then nothing. Daniels didn't say anything for a while. Just sat back in the chair watching the blank screen. We called it in, low-level priority. Logged it as a transient anomaly, no flight plan associated. The next morning, 2 civilian contractors came in, both in suits, both with restricted credentials. One of them, older guy, salt and pepper hair, no name badge, asked me to walk him through what I saw. I gave him the rundown, showed him the printouts. He didn't look surprised, didn't even ask many questions. Just nodded and said, "That's consistent," like it was something they'd seen before. Then he asked me to delete the signal logs. I told him I couldn't do that without an order. He handed me a form already filled out and signed. Department of Defense, red header, authorization code. I deleted the logs. Later that week, the same radar van was taken offline for calibration. When it came back online, the memory storage had been swapped, and all signal archives from that night were gone. I didn't say anything after that. I knew better. But that wasn't the end of it. 3 nights later, I was walking between the van and the comms building around 300. It was cold, maybe low 40s, and dead quiet. The kind of quiet that buzzes in your ears. No wind, no bugs, just stillness. I looked out past the perimeter fence toward the south end of the range, where Groom Lake airspace technically begins. There was a light, bright white, just hovering maybe half a mile off the ground. No blinking, no movement, just there. It wasn't a plane. We had flight bands in place during that window. I stood there maybe 20 seconds before it started rising, slowly, vertically, no sound. Then it disappeared. Not faded, not flew away, just gone. Next morning, Daniels handed me a sealed envelope. No name on it, just my clearance level. Inside was a short memo stating my assignment at Tonopah had ended early, effective immediately, and I was being rotated back to Nellis. No reason given. I packed up that afternoon. I didn't see Daniels again after that. Don't know if he stayed or got moved too. Years later, long after I retired, I requested my service records just out of curiosity. The Tonopah assignment was listed, but the radar logs for that week were missing. Whole stretch blacked out. I still remember the way that blip dropped. 30,000 feet to 0 in less than a second. No arc, no trail. Just there then not. I've never seen anything like it before or since. I was assigned to the Lordsburg station out in New Mexico, which covers a stretch of the high desert west of Las Cruces. That was back in 2016. Most of our shifts were long and quiet, just miles of sand and scrub with the occasional group coming through or a busted truck we had to check out. My name's Ramon Diaz. I'd been on the job about 6 years at that point. I worked mostly nights, running surveillance from the mobile towers or monitoring the FLIR feeds back at base. Nothing fancy. A couple pan-tilt zoom cameras mounted on extendable masts, tied to thermal and IR. We'd park them on ridges and let them scan the desert in wide arcs. This happened mid-July, around 2 a.m. It was one of those nights where the heat never really dropped. High 80s even after midnight. No breeze, just the kind of dry air that sticks in your throat. I was out with my partner, Alex Trujillo. We were manning one of the forward towers up near Animas. Pretty flat land out there, broken up by low ridges and arroyos. Nothing but creosote and hard-packed sand as far as you could see. We'd set the tower up around dusk and parked the truck in a cut just below it. Most of the night was uneventful. A few jackrabbits, a small group trying to move northeast. We called it in. A team picked them up easy. After that, it went dead quiet again. Around 2:10, I was watching the IR feed while Alex was in the truck catching some rest. The camera was scanning east low on the horizon, just tracing the slope of a shallow wash. Then it pinged something, a heat source, coming up slow out of the dark. I figured coyote at first, or maybe a mule deer, but it wasn't right. Whatever it was standing, upright, walking, and it was hot, not body temp warm, but white hot on the feed, like it had just come out of an oven. At first, it was just a shimmer in the distance, hard to make out, but as it moved closer, maybe 200 yards from the lens, the shape became clearer. 2 arms, 2 legs, head forward. Human-shaped, no question, but off. The proportions were wrong, legs too long, arms hanging low, and it didn't move like a person. No sway, no bounce, just smooth. I tried to lock the camera, but the auto track froze. Screen flickered for a second. When it came back, it was closer, way closer. It had covered 100 yards in what couldn't have been more than 2 seconds. I backed out of the zoom, thinking the system was glitching. I checked our secondary feed, the wide angle. Nothing there. The regular night vision cam wasn't picking it up, only IR. I radioed Alex to get up. I said, "You need to come look at this." He didn't answer right away, so I ran back to the truck, maybe 30 feet from the base of the tower. He was sitting up, rubbing his face. I told him something was out there, someone or something walking in fast from the south wash. He followed me to the monitor, but by the time we got back, it was gone. Just gone. We rewound the feed. There it was. The shape moving up from the edge of the frame, heat signatured, glowing like steel. Then, just before it would have come into full view of the secondary cam, it stopped. It crouched. That was the only way I can describe it. Like a squat. Then the image warped for a split second, like static. Next frame, nothing. It didn't walk away. It didn't fall. Just wasn't there. Alex thought I was screwing with him. I told him to check the system logs. They were clean, no errors, no loss of signal. We stepped outside and scanned the desert with binoculars. Nothing. Dead quiet. No wind, no bugs, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I decided to check the area where the thing appeared, maybe 300 yards from the tower. Took the truck, drove slow. We had thermal scopes, side-mounted lights. The ground was flat, hard-packed, no brush tall enough to hide behind. No footprints, not even disturbed sand. We did a full perimeter sweep, nothing turned up. We spent the rest of the shift watching that stretch, eyes glued to the screen. The IR was working fine, picked up rabbits, even a snake slithering out of a bush, but nothing even close to what we'd seen before. Next day, I pulled the recording and tagged it for review. Our supervisor Harris watched it once, then just nodded and said he'd send it up the chain. He didn't ask for details, didn't look surprised, didn't mention it again. A week later, I checked the archive. That clip was gone. Whole night's footage labeled as corrupted. Same with the backup drive. That was the last time I worked with that tower. Alex put in for a transfer 2 months later. He didn't say why, but I knew. We didn't talk about it again. Neither of us ever told it outside the station. But I still think about that shape, the way it moved. Like it wasn't made for our terrain, but was using it anyway, just for a little while. My wife and I were on our way back from a trip to Death Valley. It was early October, maybe the second weekend. We'd taken a few extra days off work to drive the long way home through Nevada just to see the desert at night. We don't usually do spontaneous things like that, but it had been a rough couple months and we needed it. We weren't near any major town when this happened, somewhere off Highway 375, between Rachel and Crystal Springs. I'd taken a detour on a dirt pull-off, mostly because the sky was so clear it didn't feel real. There weren't any clouds, no haze, not even any planes that we could see. Just stars. A ton of them. It was around 9:30, maybe closer to 10. The sun had been down for over an hour. We were just past the last ridgeline, maybe 10 miles from the edge of the restricted zone. I pulled over where the shoulder widened out and we shut off the engine. The temperature had dropped fast, probably mid-50s, but it was still comfortable with jackets on. There was no moon that night. The only light came from the stars and a faint green glow off the dashboard that we eventually turned off. We stood outside the car and just looked up. It was almost disorienting how many stars there were. You don't get that where we live in Reno. No light pollution out there. Not even a radio tower. Sophie, my wife, took a few pictures on her phone, but they didn't come out. I brought my camera, I shoot film, and tried a long exposure on the hood of the car. While I was setting that up, she pointed at something and said, "Is that Orion?" I looked. The belt looked right, the 3 stars in a row, but everything else was wrong. The shoulders were too far apart, or maybe tilted weird. One of the legs was missing. It looked like a knockoff version, like when a kid draws it from memory. I said maybe we were facing the wrong way, or maybe we just weren't used to seeing it from that angle. But that didn't really make sense. I've been into astronomy since I was a teenager. I know Orion when I see it. She pointed out another one. That's supposed to be Cassiopeia, right? It had the same basic W shape, but the stars were too bright, like they'd been rearranged slightly. A few of the usual surrounding stars were just gone. I mean, completely missing. No faint pinpricks, no haze, just black. I checked my phone compass to make sure we were looking in the right direction. Northeast. That was right. Then I opened Sky Guide, one of those stargazing apps, and held it up to the sky. It showed constellations in their usual places, same as always. But when I compared the real sky to the screen, they didn't match. Like the app thought the stars were one way, but what we saw didn't line up. Sophie took my phone and tried for herself. She turned in a circle slowly, trying to align the display with the stars above. I watched her stop and frown. "This isn't right," she said. "Everything's like shifted." I looked up again. I couldn't explain it. It was like someone had taken the night sky and twisted it slightly, just enough that nothing was where it was supposed to be. That's when we noticed how quiet it was. Not desert quiet, not the usual stillness. It was like the air itself wasn't moving. No wind, no bugs, not even the crunch of gravel under our shoes. Just nothing. I said we should get back in the car. She nodded. We didn't hear anything, but as we walked around to the driver's side, the camera slid off the hood and hit the ground. I hadn't touched it. It had been sitting flat for the exposure. There wasn't a breeze. Nothing was vibrating. The lens cracked. Not bad, but enough that I knew it was done. I picked it up and turned around to get in the car, and that's when I saw something move overhead. It wasn't a plane. There weren't any lights, no contrail. It was just a faint shape, almost like a shadow, drifting across the stars. The weirdest part was that it didn't block the stars completely. They sort of bent around it, like water flowing around a stone. I know that doesn't make sense. It looked wrong. It was huge and slow, moving east to west without sound. Sophie didn't see it at first. I didn't say anything. I was trying to decide if I was imagining it, but then she stopped mid-step and looked up, mouth slightly open. "Do you see that?" I nodded. It passed right overhead. No lights, no engines, no sound. Just a slow, dark blot that made the stars ripple. The whole thing took maybe 30 seconds. Then it was gone. We got in the car and shut the doors. I started the engine, but the dash lights didn't come on. The headlights didn't either. Everything worked earlier, I mom, but now it was dead except for the ignition, which was running. That's what didn't make sense. The engine was on, but the electrical systems were dark. I flicked the switches, pressed buttons. Nothing. Sophie gripped my arm and pointed out the windshield. About 50 feet away down the road, there was a soft white light hovering just above the ground, like a spotlight in fog, but there was no source. It wasn't coming from above. It was just there. It didn't flicker, didn't move. I put the car in drive and rolled forward slowly. As we got closer, the light blinked out, just gone. The second it disappeared, the dashboard came back online, the radio lit up, the headlights flicked on. Everything worked like normal. I didn't say anything, I just drove. We passed the spot where the light had been. There was nothing there. No vehicle, no debris, not even a reflector. Just dry dirt and short brush on both sides. We drove the next hour without talking. Sophie was gripping her seatbelt like she was bracing for something. I didn't take my hands off the wheel once. When we reached Crystal Springs, we pulled into the gas station parking lot and sat there for a while. It was the first time we'd seen another person since sunset. A guy was closing up the convenience store. He didn't look at us. I checked the time, it was 11:47. That didn't make sense either. The stargazing, the camera, the app, the walk around the car, the blackout, all of that felt like 20 minutes, maybe 30 tops. But we'd lost almost 2 hours. We weren't sleepy, weren't hungry, just drained. We didn't talk about it much after that night. We both remember it the same way, though, the stars in the wrong place, the shape that bent the sky, the soundless broken silence. I got the film developed a couple weeks later. The roll only had 3 exposures on it. The rest was blank. The frame from that night showed something I can't explain. Not a blur, not static, just a dark stretch across the center of the image, with stars around it bending like they'd been pulled sideways. I didn't keep that photo. I don't know what I would have done with it. I worked nights as a janitor on a restricted Air Force site out in Nevada from 2004 to 2006. I don't talk about it much, not because I signed anything, though I did, but because I don't like the way people look at you when you bring up that place. Everyone thinks you're either lying or crazy. I was neither. I just cleaned floors. My name never went on any permanent roster. I was technically a subcontractor through a private firm. They picked a few of us who didn't ask too many questions and gave us background checks, polygraphs, and a 2-week security orientation. We got flown in and out every week from a small civilian airfield outside Tonopah. We stayed on base 4 nights, got flown back Friday morning. No phones, no personal cameras, nothing with a signal. Most of the buildings were standard military stuff, offices, labs, hangars. You'd be surprised how boring it looked. Just concrete and metal and buzzed fluorescent lights. The things they didn't want you to see were always inside other things, usually hangars. We were assigned zones, and for the most part, we just did trash collection, floor waxing, restrooms, that kind of thing. The zones rotated each week, but one building never came up on the sheet, Hangar 4C. You could see it from the mess hall patio, squat and square, built into the red rock with no windows and a single access door on the east side. It wasn't hidden, just ignored. One of the older janitors, a guy named Lewis, told me early on, "Don't stare at 4C. Don't ask about it. Don't go near it." I thought he was joking. Then he said, "It hums." I laughed. He didn't. I didn't hear it until my 3rd month out there. I was doing bins behind the admin building after midnight, and the air was still. I mean, dead quiet. No wind, no planes, nothing. And then, real faint, like it was coming up through the ground, I heard it. A low mechanical hum, deep and constant, like a power transformer under load. The sound had a weird vibration to it, like it tickled your ears if you stood in one spot too long. I followed it. It was louder toward the back end of the complex, where the geology got rockier. I passed 2 other hangars, both silent, then walked toward 4C. No lights on it, no vents or ducts, or even external wires. Just solid matte black steel. But the humming was stronger there. Not louder, just thicker. I could feel it in my ankles. I stood maybe 10 feet from the door and realized my breath was fogging. It had been a warm night, mid-70s, but the air around that building felt cold. Cold enough that my fingers tingled. The door had no handle, just a card reader with a keypad. I backed away. I didn't want to be seen near it. Cameras were everywhere. I didn't tell Lewis about it, but a few days later we were mopping floors in the comms building, and he brought it up out of nowhere. Said, "Don't linger near 4C. It notices." I asked him what he meant. Just said, "Some things in there been running longer than this base has existed. Some things aren't ours." I thought he meant old tech. Experimental engines, maybe. But the way he said it stuck with me. The humming came and went after that. Some weeks I never heard it. Some nights it pulsed so heavy it made me dizzy. Once I caught another guy, one of the new hires, standing near it at 2 a.m. with both hands on the wall like he was listening through it. I called out, and he didn't react. I had to tap his shoulder to snap him out of it. He looked pale and confused and didn't say a word. Next week, he wasn't on the flight back in. Never saw him again. They didn't tell us anything when people left. Just reassigned their zones. One night, about 6 months in, I got assigned supply inventory in a detached storage unit near 4C. It was just supposed to be counting bleach and paper towels. I was in there alone with a clipboard when the humming started, louder than I'd ever heard it. It was so intense the metal shelving rattled. Then, just like that, all the overhead lights in the unit flickered and went out. Total darkness. The emergency exit signs stayed lit, but they looked dim, like the batteries were dying. I waited, thinking it was a power blip. Then I realized I couldn't hear the air system anymore. Couldn't hear anything except that hum. I walked outside, and the first thing I noticed was the sky. It wasn't cloudy, but the stars looked wrong. The pattern of them. Orion was twisted, like someone had mirrored it. I don't know how else to say it. The base was completely dark. Not a single window lit, no spotlights, no headlights, just that deep hum coming from 4C. I walked back toward the main path, trying to stay calm. I thought maybe there was a drill or lockdown I'd missed, but there were no alarms, no announcements, just me, alone in the dark. As I passed near 4C, I heard a new sound layered under the hum, like breathing. Not mine. Slow, steady inhalations, like something huge and sleeping. I swear the air coming off that building was colder than ice. I didn't stop. I walked straight to the janitor's brake trailer and sat in the dark until the lights came back on about 20 minutes later. No one else said a word about it the next morning. I asked Lewis, and he just looked at me and said, "You stayed out too long." A few months later, I got reassigned to Facility 7B, full-time. I didn't argue. It was farther from the ridge. I didn't see 4C again. When I quit the job, they debriefed me in a little white room with no clocks. The guy across from me didn't have a nameplate, just said, "You'll sign this and you'll never talk about anything you saw here. Understood?" I signed, but I didn't see anything. Not really, I just heard it, felt it. That low hum that seemed to come from under the world, and the cold that stayed on your skin even after you left. That building's probably still there, still locked, still humming. I was backpacking solo in the San Juan Mountains that week. Late September, cold enough at night to frost over my water filter, but the days were perfect. Blue skies, orange aspens, dry trails. I'd planned a 5-day loop off the Continental Divide. Nothing crazy, maybe 40 miles round trip. I wasn't new to solo hiking. I'd done the Wind River Range the year before, but this was the first time I felt uneasy from the first night. I camped the first night near a shelf above Hermosa Creek. Nobody else around. I hadn't seen another person since I parked my car at the trailhead. Just elk tracks, bear scat, the usual. I made dinner, filtered water, climbed into my bag by 9. It was one of those still, soundless nights where everything feels padded. No wind, no bugs, no moon. I fell asleep fast. I woke up in the dark with no idea why. My watch said 2:43 a.m. I remember that clearly. Not because the time meant anything to me then, but because I thought it was weirdly specific. Not 2:30, not 3 or 2:43. And I wasn't groggy either. I sat bolt upright like someone had just clapped next to my head. I listened. Nothing. No branches, no animals, no footsteps. I unzipped the tent door and stuck my head out, half expecting to see a raccoon or something poking around my bear hang. Instead, I saw this white light moving low across the valley. It wasn't a flashlight. It was too bright, too smooth, perfectly round, maybe the size of a basketball from that distance. Hovering maybe 10 feet off the ground, just above the creek bed, slowly gliding east to west. I thought it might be a drone at first, but there was no sound. Total silence. I watched it for maybe 30 seconds before it slipped behind some trees and disappeared. I sat there another 10 minutes, trying to come up with an explanation. Maybe moonlight catching on something. But there was no moon. Maybe a reflection from a plane, but it was so low and it moved like it was following the terrain. Eventually, I zipped the tent back up and forced myself to go back to sleep. Next morning, I told myself I'd imagined it. Maybe I had been dreaming and woke up confused. Maybe it was just a weird trick of the atmosphere. I hiked all day, did about 11 miles over the pass, and dropped down into a lower basin where the aspens were already gold. I camped next to a small lake, nothing around me but grass and rock. Again, no sign of other people. I ate, stretched, and went to bed early again. It got colder that night. My sleeping bag had condensation on it from breathing through the hood. I was deep asleep when I woke up again, same way as the night before, alert, pulse going, no sound at all. 2:43 a.m. This time, I didn't hesitate. I unzipped the tent and looked out. The orb was back, same size, same height, same movement. This time it was a little closer, maybe 300 yards away, still over flat ground, moving parallel to the tree line at the base of the ridge. White, solid light. No flicker, no blinking. It didn't scan or sway or change direction, just moved steady, slow, like it had all the time in the world. I watched it until it passed behind a stand of dead trees and didn't come back out. Something about the way it moved bothered me. Not just the silence. It didn't bob or drift like a balloon, and it didn't float smoothly like a drone. It looked like it was following a line that didn't quite match the terrain, like it was moving through something I couldn't see. I stayed awake a long time after that. No more lights showed up. Nothing else stirred, just the occasional rustle of leaves when the breeze picked up. By morning, I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid. I packed up and moved camp again, another 8 or 9 miles into a narrow gulch with cliffs on both sides. I figured if it was some weird weather phenomenon, being lower might change things. I also wanted to see if anything happened without such a wide view. That night was dead quiet again. I went to sleep early, exhausted, woke up sharply. 2:43 a.m. I didn't unzip the tent this time. I just lay there, holding my breath. I couldn't see anything from where I was, but the air felt charged. I don't know how else to say it. My skin felt tight, my fingers tingled. The kind of sensation you get right before lightning strikes, only there wasn't a cloud in the sky. I listened hard, and then I heard this faint, low humming. Not from above, from behind me, from the other side of the gulch. It was soft, mechanical maybe, but not like an engine. More like the sound a refrigerator makes in a quiet house, only slower, deeper. It lasted maybe 20 seconds, then gone. I unzipped the tent slowly and stuck my head out. Nothing. Stars. Ridge. No movement. But when I looked at the far side of the gulch, I saw a small patch of trees glowing slightly. Not brightly, just enough to notice, like they were lit from underneath even though there was no source. The glow faded after a few seconds. I stayed in my bag the rest of the night, staring at the tent ceiling. Day 4, I hiked hard. Didn't stop for lunch, just kept moving. I don't think I made a conscious decision to cut the loop short, but I took a connector trail that headed back toward the trailhead. My plan was to camp one more night, then hike out the next morning. I found a spot near a small rock shelf overlooking a canyon. Higher ground, more visibility. I didn't want to be boxed in again. I set up my tent in the open. Didn't care if the wind kicked up. That night I didn't sleep at all. I stayed awake, zipped in my bag, waiting. The watch blinked 2:43 a.m. and I already had the tent door unzipped. The orb came from the east this time, lower than before, barely clearing the tops of the trees. Closer, too, maybe 100 yards. Same silent glide, same soft intensity of light. But there was something new, a shadow beneath it. It wasn't sharp. It didn't have a shape I could name. Just a blot, like the light above it was reacting to something solid underneath. It followed the orb perfectly, like it was attached by invisible string. And it didn't touch the ground. It moved just above it, following the same strange path. The orb paused. Not long, maybe 4 or 5 seconds, and tilted slightly. I don't know how else to describe that part. It didn't tilt like an object. It shifted perspective, like it noticed me, and then it kept moving. Back into the trees, out of view. I packed up before sunrise and hiked the last 9 miles straight through. Got to the trailhead around noon. There were 3 other cars in the lot. Normal people. Nobody acting weird. I didn't say anything to anyone. That was 2 years ago. I've backpacked since, but only with friends, and never in that area again. I was working nights at a gas station just off Route 375, a few miles outside of Rachel, Nevada. Small place, one pump island, a tiny convenience store. We got some tourists during the day, people heading toward the extraterrestrial highway signs, the black mailbox, all that junk, but at night it was just truckers, locals, and the occasional loner on a long drive. My name's Cole. I'm not from Nevada. I moved out here in 2017 after a breakup and ended up staying. The job was easy, paid like crap, but the boss didn't care what I did as long as the register balanced and the place was locked up by midnight. Most nights, I'd clean the coffee pots, restock the drinks, then sit behind the counter watching old horror movies on my phone. We had 3 cameras, one pointed at the door, one at the counter, and one outside above the pumps. They recorded onto a cheap DVR system with a 2-week loop. It was grainy and slow, but it worked. This happened in March of 2022. Thursday night, cold wind, no moon. The kind of night where the windows sweat on the inside. I was about 15 minutes from closing, finishing up the register count, when I heard the chime over the door. It startled me because I hadn't seen headlights pull in. The guy who walked in didn't say anything. He wasn't carrying anything either. No wallet, no keys, no phone. Just walked in slow, like he was trying not to wake someone. He stopped right in the middle of the store and looked up at the security camera above the door. He didn't look crazy or strung out. He was in his 40s maybe, short brown hair, tan windbreaker, jeans. Average. Completely average. But there was something off about the way he stood. His hands stayed flat at his sides, and his neck was tilted just a little too far back, like it hurt to hold his head that way, but he was doing it on purpose. I asked if I could help him. No response. He didn't even blink. I waited. Still nothing. He just kept staring up at the camera. I thought maybe he was deaf or confused, so I walked around the counter and tried again, closer this time. I said, "Hey, sir, we're closing soon. Do you need anything?" Still nothing. Not a twitch. He didn't look at me, just the camera. Like I wasn't even there. I stood next to him and looked up at the feed screen behind the counter. That monitor showed all 3 camera views at once, stacked in a grid. The weird part was the indoor cameras were showing static. The pump camera, the one outside, was fine, but the 2 inside feeds, the ones that should have shown me and him standing there, were just snow. I went back behind the counter to check the DVR. It was recording, red light blinking, timestamp moving. No error message. I toggled through the feeds, front door, counter, pumps, and only the pump cam had a picture. The other 2 were frozen or glitching. Every once in a while, a frame would flash up, usually of an empty store, then cut back to static. He stayed like that for 10 minutes, didn't move, didn't speak, just stared up at the dead camera like he was waiting for something to happen. The only sound was the fridge compressors humming in the back. I didn't know what to do. I was getting nervous, but he wasn't being aggressive, just weird. I didn't want to call the cops for someone who hadn't actually done anything. Eventually he turned and walked out. Didn't buy anything. Didn't look at me. Didn't even blink on his way out. Just made a sharp turn and walked out the door like he'd just finished checking something off a list. The bell over the door chimed again, and I looked out the window, but I didn't see any car. Nothing parked at the pumps, nothing pulling onto the highway. I even went outside to check. The wind had died down. It was totally still. No tire tracks in the dirt. No footprints either. Not even his. I locked up early and drove home. Next morning, I told my boss, Javier, about it. He thought I was joking until I showed him the DVR. He watched the whole 10-minute clip with the static. Timestamp ran normal, pump camera looked fine. A couple of semis drove by in the background. One even pulled in and got gas, but inside it was just fuzz. You could kind of hear audio, but it was warped, like underwater. Every once in a while, a crackle would spike, and you'd think a voice was about to come through, but it never did. Javier was creeped out, but he mostly just seemed annoyed. He figured the guy was trying to mess with our system somehow, maybe jam the feed. I didn't see how. The cameras weren't wireless. It was all hardwired through the back wall. He formatted the DVR that day and replaced the 2 indoor cameras with some cheap new ones from the supply shelf. We kept the old ones in a drawer, but they never got put back up. A few weeks later, the DVR started recording over that night, like nothing happened. I started noticing little things after that. Nothing huge, just weirdness. The back door, which was always stiff, started creaking open on its own, even when I knew I'd locked it. The cooler lights would flicker when nobody was near them. And a couple times the door chime went off with no one there. I'd go check, thinking maybe wind or pressure changes triggered it, but the outside camera wouldn't show anything. Just the door swinging slightly. One night in April, I stayed late to stock shelves. Around 1:15 a.m., I was in the back cooler when I heard the chime again. I froze. I didn't want to come out. I just stood there between racks of bottled water and Gatorade, listening. No footsteps, no voices, just the soft buzz of the store lights through the open cooler door. When I finally stepped out, the place was empty. I checked the DVR later. This time, all 3 cameras had recorded fine. But the weird part was, during that exact minute, the feed from the door camera looked off. It wasn't static, it wasn't blurry, but the colors were wrong. Everything had this blue tint, like it was lit with floodlights. And there was a faint distortion in the lower half of the frame, like heat shimmer off pavement. There was no figure, just the door. Opening, then slowly closing. After that, I stopped working nights. I told Javier my schedule had to change or I'd quit. He didn't ask why. I think he'd started feeling it too. He put in some motion lights outside, replaced the chime sensor, even had a tech guy come check for interference in the wiring. They didn't find anything. The guy never came back. Or if he did, the cameras didn't catch it. My second night on shift, I saw lights where there weren't supposed to be any. I just started a contract job at Groom Lake late fall 2008. I was 26, ex-Navy, and needed decent money fast. I wasn't cleared for anything sensitive, just perimeter patrol on the south end of the restricted area. They didn't arm us, just radio check-ins every 30 minutes, and strict instructions not to leave our designated sector unless told. Everything felt like overkill, but the paycheck was solid. The guy I was paired with, Marcus, had been there 6 months already. Retired MP, quiet, maybe late 30s. First time I met him, he said, "Rule 1, if you see something strange," and he didn't. He wasn't joking, just gave me a look like that was the end of it. Night shifts were long and dead quiet. Our patrol loop was about 8 miles of gravel road between remote sensor poles. Flat desert on both sides, fenced off, empty as far as you could see. Most nights we just drove in slow loops and did visual checks. You're not supposed to sleep, but everyone does, 10 minutes at a time, engine running, windows cracked. That second night we were splitting loops. Marcus did the first one solo, while I waited at Station C in the truck. There's a little covered area there with a busted chair and a cooler full of off-brand Gatorade. I remember the wind that night. Strong gusts from the north. Real dry. You could hear it coming before it hit the truck, like a wave rolling over low hills. Around 2:40 a.m., I saw a white light out toward the basin, maybe 3 miles south past where the restricted boundary ends. Not a headlight or anything, just a solid white glow, stationary. I radioed Marcus and asked if he was seeing it. He didn't answer. I waited 10 seconds, called again, still nothing. That's when the light started moving. Not fast, just slow and straight, horizontal to the ground. It stayed at the same elevation, probably 30 or 40 feet up. At first, I thought it might be a drone, but there was no noise. Even with the wind, I should have heard something, a motor, a hum, but there was nothing. I got out and stood behind the truck door. The light kept coming. I figured I should call it in, but I hesitated. I kept hearing Marcus's voice in my head. Pretend you didn't. The light stopped maybe a mile out, still hovering. It was hard to tell size. It wasn't shining from anything, just a sphere of light like a glow stick without a source. No beam, no flicker, just hovering in place. I finally keyed up the mic again. "Marcus, you copy?" This time I got static. Then a weird pop. Not like interference, but like when you unplug a speaker while music's playing. Then his voice, low and fast. "Stay in the truck, don't look at it." That's all he said. I asked him where he was. He didn't answer, just more static, then silence. I backed into the truck and shut the door. Didn't start the engine. Just sat there with the radio in my hand, staring through the windshield. The light hadn't moved, but something else had. The ground near it looked off, like a shimmer, like heat waves above pavement, even though the air was cold. I turned off my flashlight and just watched. I didn't blink much. I was trying to convince myself it was a test flight, maybe something they didn't brief us on. But the longer I stared, the more wrong it felt. Around 3:10, it moved again. Not away, not toward me, just up. Straight vertical. Slow and smooth, no noise. It went up maybe 200 feet, then cut out completely. Not faded, just gone. I sat in the dark for another 15 minutes before Marcus pulled up behind me. His lights were off until he was right behind the truck. When he got out, he didn't say anything, just leaned against the hood and lit a cigarette. I walked over and asked what the hell that was. He shook his head. "Don't talk about it," he said. I told him I'd logged it. He looked at me hard. "You didn't see anything. You stayed in your sector, no anomalies. That's what the log says." I asked again what it was. He took a long drag, then said, "That wasn't for us. That's all you need to know." We didn't speak the rest of the shift. When morning came, we handed off to the day guys and filed our logs. Mine just said routine perimeter check, no incidents. I started to write something else, but stopped. The next few nights were quiet. I didn't see the light again. But things felt off in that sector after that. The wind died completely around the same time each night, between 2:30 and 3. Every time I passed Station C, my radio would fuzz out for exactly 8 seconds. Not more, not less. Just 8 seconds of static. I brought it up to Marcus once. He said the same thing. If it doesn't ask for you, don't go looking for it. By week 3, I stopped asking. I worked there for 5 months, only saw that light once more, near the end. Same area, same time of night. This time I didn't get out of the truck. Didn't even touch the radio. It floated for a while, then vanished like before. I didn't look for it after that. I finished my contract and never went back. Marcus stayed. I heard from another guy that he was still there in 2011, working nights. Said he liked the quiet. I think about that second night sometimes. Not just the light, but the way the ground shimmered around it. Like the space under it didn't want to be seen. Like whatever it was didn't care if you noticed, as long as you stayed where you were. It started around 10:30 at night, maybe closer to 11. I was driving back from my uncle's place in Monroe, heading toward my apartment in Athens. Normally, I'd take the main highway, but I'd had a couple beers with him and didn't want to risk any attention from troopers, so I took the back roads. I know the area pretty well. A lot of old farm roads, long stretches between intersections, not many streetlights. The road I was on, County Road 217, winds through some pretty empty country. Old chicken farms, some abandoned houses, maybe a trailer or two tucked back in the trees. No shoulder to speak of and just barely 2 lanes wide. It was cool out, but not cold. Early October. Windows down a bit, radio off. I was just cruising along, kind of zoning out. That's when I noticed headlights behind me. They were far back at first, just a soft glow around the bends. I figured someone else had taken the same shortcut and was catching up. I kept my speed at 45. The road was posted at 40, but nobody drives it that slow. Every now and then, the lights would dip as the car went over a hill or around a curve, then come back again. I didn't think anything of it at first, but then I started noticing how steady they were. No weaving, no bouncing, just locked onto me. Same distance, same brightness. No turn signals, no flickering, just smooth and steady. I tapped my brakes once, just a little, to see if they'd slow down too. They didn't. I kept driving. A few minutes passed. The road was getting narrower, no more houses, just woods on either side. I started getting that prickly feeling on the back of my neck, like when you know someone's watching you. So I figured I'd pull off at the next gravel driveway or pasture gate. Let them pass. I saw a turnoff on the right, one of those grass clearings with a rusted cattle gate, and slowed down. I eased onto the shoulder, angled the car like I was pulling in, and waited. I kept one eye on the mirror, but nothing came around the bend. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, engine idling, headlights pointing into the trees. I thought maybe they'd turned off somewhere without me noticing, but that didn't make sense. There weren't any other roads for miles. I backed out slowly, angled my car to look behind me down the road. It was empty. No headlights, no taillights, no engine sounds, nothing. I sat there with my foot on the brake, staring at the empty curve behind me. It was too tight for anyone to have turned off without me hearing gravel or seeing dust. I would have noticed. I drove another few miles, slower this time. My eyes kept going to the mirror. The road felt darker, like the trees had closed in somehow. I turned the radio on just to have some sound. Static. Flipped through the presets. Nothing but white noise. That part of Georgia's got spotty reception, but usually I can get at least one country station. Nothing came in. I reached a small intersection, four-way stop with a blinking yellow, and waited a bit longer than I needed to. Just sat there with my blinker on, checking the mirror again. Still nothing. But right as I turned left onto the next stretch, I thought I saw something in the rear view. Not headlights this time. Just a shape, like a pale blur in the road. I slowed down again, checked the mirror, it was gone. Another few minutes passed, then the road started climbing. This section's steep, maybe 100 feet of elevation, then it levels out near an old silo that collapsed a few years back. As I crested the hill, I saw lights behind me again, same exact spacing, same soft glow, like they'd never left. My heart jumped a little. I wasn't even sure if I'd seen them at first, but there they were. No engine noise, no dust, just those two pale lights hovering in the curve behind me. I kept going. I didn't pull over this time. I wanted to be done. About a mile ahead was a T-junction with a small church, Oakfield Missionary. I figured I'd turn in, get out, see if they kept going. Worst case, maybe it was just some kid messing around. I pulled into the lot and turned off the ignition. My dome light came on. I cracked the door and stood next to the car, listening. Silence. The road behind me was empty again. I walked to the edge of the lot, gravel crunching under my boots, and looked both ways. The trees swayed a little in the breeze. Nothing else moved. I stood there for a while, feeling stupid. Then I heard gravel shifting across the road. Not from behind, from across the intersection, other side of the tree line. Just a single crunch, like a step. I called out, "Hello?" Nothing answered. I got back in the car, locked the doors, and started driving again. This time, I didn't stop. Even when I saw the lights again 5 minutes later, they didn't get closer. Just stayed back there, always the same distance. The last stretch before town is a long downhill with open fields on both sides. As soon as I came over the ridge and saw the glow of Athens ahead, the lights behind me vanished. Not faded, vanished. 1 second they were there, next they weren't. I pulled into the Waffle House on Epps Bridge, sat in the lot for 20 minutes drinking a Coke. My hands were shaking a little. There was no car behind me, no other headlights on that road the whole time I drove it, just mine. And those. Whatever they were. I've taken that route dozens of times. I still do, now and then. But I haven't seen those lights again. And I don't stop anymore. It showed up just once. Less than a second. I was the only one who caught it, because I was the only one looking at that specific loop at that specific moment. I work as the morning meteorologist at a small TV station out in central Nevada, KZNV Channel 8. Our coverage area is mostly empty. Desert, ranches, a few little towns spread out like islands, Fallen, Lovelock, maybe the edges of Ely if the weather's bad enough. I'm not a flashy weatherman, just someone who likes maps and wind patterns and a quiet routine. This was mid-January, about a year ago. A Wednesday morning, cold and clear. I'd come in around 3:45 a.m., like always. Made some instant coffee in the break room, went to my little office, pulled up the radar feeds. It's habit more than anything. There's rarely anything interesting at that hour unless there's a front coming in, which there wasn't. Around 4:10, I was scrubbing through archived loops from the past hour, just looking for jet stream weirdness or signs of inversion. We use a third-party Doppler tool layered on top of the NWS data, and I've got it set to animate in 10-second increments. On the sweep for 3:42:10 to 3:42:20, I saw something, just a flicker. I scrubbed back and froze the frame at 3:42:14. There was a disturbance over the Carson Sink. Not precipitation, not a front. Just a dense, circular, I don't even know what to call it. The closest thing I can compare it to is when a helicopter flies low over water and pushes down a ring of ripples, except this was in the air. The ring was massive, maybe 3 miles across, and it was gone in the next frame. No echo after, no residual movement. It didn't drift. It just showed up, warped the local wind vectors, and vanished. I thought it might be an error, a bad frame, but when I overlaid the raw wind model data, there was an actual spike. Brief uptick in surface wind shear localized only to that spot. Wind shifted outward in every direction for a single reading, then returned to baseline. I printed the frame and circled the coordinates, figuring I'd check satellite later. But that's when the station lights flickered. Only for a second, like a brownout. Then everything came back on. The Doppler program restarted, which it shouldn't do, and when I reopened it, the 340 frame was gone. It skipped from 340/20, like that timestamp never existed. I pulled up the backup data from the National Weather Service feed. Their version didn't have it. Just clean, empty desert. No anomalies. I checked our local log. The server showed a 1-second clock mismatch right around the same time. Nothing dramatic, just a hiccup, but enough to push a single frame off the timeline. I still had the printout. The ring was faint and black and white, but it was there. I tucked it into my folder and didn't mention it on air. What would I say? Something invisible bent the sky over the salt flats. Later that day, around lunch, I drove out toward the Carson Sink. It's only about 45 minutes from town. Nothing out there, just flat alkali plain, cracked white dirt, and old fence posts. The sky was cloudless, bright, and quiet. I parked at the edge of a dry lake bed and got out. The wind was steady, maybe 8 or 10 knots, and I remember thinking it was unusually cold for midday. I walked out a little, just scanning the ground. There weren't any tracks, which wasn't weird. No one goes out there much, and the wind erases things fast. But then I saw a patch where the crusted dirt had fractured. Not like someone had driven over it, more like it had settled differently. A big ring of slightly darker, rougher soil. I wouldn't have noticed it if I hadn't been looking for a ring. It was about the same size as the radar disturbance. I crouched down and touched the dirt. It wasn't hot. It wasn't cold either. Just dead. That's the only way I can describe it. No lizards, no bugs, no tumbleweed fragments. Even the wind seemed quieter there. On the way back to my car, I saw a flash. It came from behind me, just a brief white pulse. Not bright enough to blind, but enough to make me turn around. Nothing there. No plane, no drone, no reflection. Just empty desert. Then I realized my phone had powered off. It was at 80% when I left town. I'd used it for GPS. Now it wouldn't respond. Black screen, no vibration, nothing. I got in the car and tried the ignition. It turned, but sluggish, like the battery didn't want to work. After a few seconds it caught and the dash lit up, but the clock was wrong, blinking 12 like it had been reset. I drove back slower than usual. The whole way I kept checking the mirrors. I didn't see anything, but I felt off, like there was something just behind me, pacing the car. Back at the station, I plugged my phone in. It powered on immediately. Time and date were correct. Battery read 81%. No missed calls, no weird logs. I checked the Doppler one more time before I left. The feed was clean, no gaps. But when I went to retrieve the earlier printout, the one with the anomaly, it was gone from my folder. I keep that folder in a locked drawer. Only 2 people at the station have keys. Me and the tech guy, Ed. He swore he hadn't touched anything. A couple nights later, I was at home watching wind patterns from my laptop. I keep a little station set up in my backyard, thermometer, barometer, anemometer, and I like to compare my local data to regional models. At exactly 9:11 p.m., the anemometer stopped transmitting. It uses a 433 MHz wireless signal. Reliable within 100 feet, never drops. I went outside with a flashlight. Everything looked fine. No damage, no wind. But when I turned toward the shed, I saw something on the far side of the yard, near the fence. Just a shape, low to the ground, maybe 4 feet tall, round, not moving. I aimed the light at it, but there was nothing there. The anemometer came back online the moment I stepped forward. The data stream resumed at 9:13:02, exactly 2 minutes after it cut out. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the bedroom window cracked open a bit, and every so often I'd hear this soft clicking sound outside, like 2 stones tapping together. Slow, rhythmic. I didn't go check. The next morning, the yard looked normal, but the shed door was open. I hadn't used it in weeks. Nothing was missing, but my backup anemometer, the one I hadn't installed yet, was sitting on the ground outside the shed, perfectly centered in a patch of frost. There was no frost anywhere else in the yard, just that one circle. I boxed it up and mailed it to my cousin in Idaho. Told him it was a spare. I haven't asked if he's used it yet. I still do the morning weather. I still check the radar loops every day, but I don't scrub through the Carson Sink frames anymore. If something shows up again, I'm not sure I want to know. I was flying my drone out near Arroyo Seco, New Mexico. It's this high desert area just north of Taos, kind of barren but beautiful, with a lot of open space and these scattered rock formations, perfect for line of sight flying. I'd been out there a few times before, usually early mornings on weekends when the wind's calm and no one's around. That Saturday, it was just after 7 a.m., clear skies, not even a breeze. Cold enough I had gloves on with the fingers cut out. My drone, a custom-built quadcopter with GPS hold and return to home, was running smooth, battery fully charged. I'd flown it up to about 300 feet and was doing wide passes back and forth along this narrow ridge. It wasn't especially high, but it had this steep drop-off on the south side with loose rock and brush. Nothing too dramatic. About 6 minutes into the flight, I noticed the drone kept veering slightly right whenever I tried to push it along a straight westward line. Not a lot, maybe 5 or 10 degrees, but enough to show up on the controller's display. At first, I figured it was interference or GPS drift. Happens sometimes, but when I switched into manual mode, it still pushed itself off course. I hovered for a second and recalibrated the compass. No errors. Tried again. Same thing. Every time I flew it past this one part of the ridge, just east of a crumbling basalt outcrop, the quad would twitch and swerve like it was being nudged. I even landed, checked the props, the gyro, everything. No damage, no dust. Took off again. It only happened in that one spot. I flew higher. Same thing. Lower. Still there. It was like there was some invisible wall it didn't want to cross cleanly. It would hit that zone and either slow down or slide slightly off axis before recovering. Around the 10-minute mark, I brought it back and switched to my backup battery. Decided to do one more pass, slower this time, and record everything. The drone has a GoPro mount underneath, stabilized gimbal, high res. I flew straight out toward the ridge again and let it coast forward slowly at around 200 feet altitude. No sudden moves, just letting it cruise. Right as it passed over that same stretch, not even 30 feet above the rocks, the quad jerked again. But this time the motors pitched harder than usual, like it had hit turbulence. I didn't touch the stick, just watched the telemetry. There was a small dip in altitude, like it had lost lift for a second, and then it bounced back and continued. No warnings, no fail-safe triggers. It finished the path without issue, and I brought it down gently in the same patch of dirt I'd launched from. Packed it up, drove home. Later that afternoon, I dumped the footage onto my laptop. Most of it was the usual. Clean video, smooth pans, nice light. But around the 4:23 mark on that second flight, right as it crossed the weird patch, the video stuttered, just for a frame or two. And then something passed under the drone. I had to scroll through it frame by frame. It was maybe 2-3 aims at most, barely visible. But there was this shape, a dark triangle, almost black, maybe 15 or 20 feet across, moving low along the ridge, right under the drone. Not fast, just drifting sideways, completely silent. There was no blur, no motion lines, but it definitely wasn't still. The camera picked up a slight distortion around it too, like heat shimmer, but more uniform. I thought maybe it was a shadow or a bird, although it didn't look like either. It had sharp edges, too straight. I zoomed in until the pixels broke apart, trying to see if it was just an artifact or lens glitch, but it wasn't on the lens. It moved between two shrubs in the background. It occluded them, passed in front. Whatever it was, it had mass. I checked the GPS coordinates from the log file and drove back out there the next day. Walked to the spot with my phone, using the app to match where the drone had hovered. Nothing there, no tracks, no debris, just loose gravel and a weird echo when I shouted. The rock wall bounced sound back at a funny angle, like it wasn't shaped quite right. I flew again, lower this time, same flight path, no deviation. The drone held true, no drift, no interference, just clean, boring flight. I went back 3 more weekends, took 2 different drones, same weather, never happened again. But that triangle, it wasn't a shadow. I don't know what it was. I didn't see it with my eyes, only on the footage, and only once. I still have the clip saved. I've watched it maybe 50 times. Every time I see it, it feels like I missed something important, like it was there before I noticed it, like maybe it was watching me the whole time.